We started writing this on Friday, April 7th, 2017. Everything in this story took place the day before, on Thursday, April 6th, after school. My best friend and I are psychic mediums, though I, Jaisbal, am a bit more practiced or experienced, depending on how you'd put it. For privacy, we'll go by our favorite names. I'll be Jaisbal and my friend will be Susan. After school, Susan told me she felt a strange, pulling sensation in her chest, like something was leading her somewhere. So I invited her to meet up at my house. She came over around 4:35 p.m., and we started walking down the road. As we walked, we discussed this feeling, and I decided to let her take the lead since I had no idea where we were headed. Susan said it felt like whatever was leading her was jumping around town. We live in a small town. I've had similar experiences before, though I usually knew exactly where to go. But today wasn't about me. It was about Susan and whatever was pulling her in. She described the feeling as both safe and unsettling at the same time. It didn't feel entirely wrong, but it was unusual. I had a hunch this could be something darker, maybe a demon, but we decided to follow it anyway. I wasn't going to let her go alone. It's been coming and going for about 1.5 years now, she told me. Writer switch, Jaisbal to Susan. Hi, it's Susan now. I'll explain what happened next. About 3 months ago, I had the same sensation that something wanted me to find it, so I followed it until the feeling just disappeared. Yesterday, April 6th, 17, at around 3:18 p.m., something pulled me to the northeast, and then it gradually shifted south. After school, I met up with Jaisbal and we followed where it was guiding us. It felt like we were being drawn into some sort of game. We thought it might be a little girl or maybe a demon, we weren't sure. It led us to places I used to go as a child. Eventually, we ended up near my favorite spot by a river. There was construction on the bridge over the river, but we slipped into the wooded area unnoticed. We walked through the brush until we reached a small clearing with a muddy tree stump. For some reason, I felt the need to take off my shoes and change into shorts. I had a pair on underneath my pants. Then, I asked aloud, "Why did you bring us here?" A voice answered, "To play." "Why do you want to play?" I asked. "I'm lonely," it replied. "Why are you lonely?" I continued. "Got separated." "How did you get separated?" I asked. "I wandered off." "Wandered from where?" I asked. "The other campers." At this point, I felt an urge to look for a camp, so we walked a little further. But soon, I sensed something was off. I asked, "Bella, is this a game?" "Yes," she replied. "What kind of game?" I asked, but there was no answer. Jaisbal tried asking, "Is this a game of tag?" The reply came, "No." Then Jaisbal asked, "Is this a game of hide and seek?" "Yes," Bella responded. "What happens when we find you?" Jaisbal asked. "I find you," Bella replied. "Does the game end after that?" Jaisbal asked. "No," she answered. At that, we left the area as quickly as we could, making sure not to leave anything behind. P.S. from Susan. In the middle of all this, I felt a strong urge to draw a bird. Instead, I ended up sketching what looked like someone raising their arm and running away. When I showed it to Bella, she told me it was an angel. Jazz here. My spirit guides had already told me it was an angel as she was drawing it in the mud with a stick. After that, we walked home, talking about what we just experienced and what to do next. And that's pretty much it. My husband, our 2 kids, and I recently moved into his late father's house, deep in a rural farming town. We lived far off the main road, down a gravel path, with our nearest neighbor over a mile away. Life was peaceful, and things seemed to be settling in well. The kids' rooms were upstairs, and ours was downstairs. My husband worked full-time, and I stayed home with the kids who rode the bus to school. I'd have the house to myself for a few hours each day. Occasionally, I'd hear footsteps upstairs, heavy, like boots on the hardwood floor. I brushed it off, thinking it might be my father-in-law's spirit. Shortly after we moved in, my 4-year-old daughter mentioned making a new friend. She told me her friend's name, something old-fashioned like Madeline or Marjorie. She said her friend lived in our pasture, near the pond, and looked just like her. a little girl with brown hair and a dress. She said this friend would visit her room to play dolls, talking about her as though she was a real friend from preschool. My son, who was 6, never mentioned any friends like this, so I assumed it was just an imaginary friend. Then, one day, my daughter seemed upset and worried about her friend. She told me that her friend had been camping by the pond with her parents, but one day her parents just left her. She explained that her friend had been alone for a long time. This struck me as odd since we'd never had anyone camp on our property. The pond was visible from our back door, and anyone would have to pass through our yard to reach it. Plus, we had English mastiffs that wouldn't let anyone near without alerting us. The story made me uneasy, so I started changing the subject whenever she brought up her friend. Then came the night everything changed. The kids were asleep upstairs, and my husband and I were in our room downstairs. I woke up suddenly, feeling like someone was watching me. The house was silent, not even a clock ticking, and I couldn't hear any unusual sounds. Yet I knew someone was there. I lay still, hoping it was just my imagination, when I saw a small head peeking around the doorway. Thinking it was my daughter, I whispered, "What are you doing out of bed?" But there was no response. The head quickly moved out of sight. I called her name, but there was no answer, which was odd because my daughter would have come straight in if she'd heard me. I lay back down, my heart pounding, when the figure reappeared in the doorway. This time I realized it wasn't my daughter. The little girl had shoulder-length brown hair and wore an old-fashioned dark blue dress with ruffles. Her face was blank, expressionless. Terrified, I tried to wedge myself under my sleeping husband, who, a heavy sleeper, snored on beside me. As I lay there, praying silently for protection, she moved to the foot of our bed. Her expression shifted. She looked confused, maybe even angry or upset. Then, in one swift motion, she stretched out her hands and began pulling the comforter off the bed, dragging it to the floor. Paralyzed with fear, I couldn't move or scream. Desperately, I continued praying in my head, calling out to Jesus and even to my deceased father-in-law. I begged him to help her, to guide her wherever she needed to go, and to get her out of our house. The next thing I knew, it was morning. I must have fallen asleep or passed out from the fear. After that night, I never felt or saw anything unusual in the house again. My daughter also stopped mentioning her friend entirely. I like to believe my father-in-law helped her find peace. Later, I did some research. I discovered that a young girl, only 5 years old, had drowned in our pond back in the 1970s. Just to give a little background, I'm 24, and up until recently, I hadn't dealt with any paranormal or unexplainable events. But over the past few years, some strange experiences have changed that. I tend to look for logical explanations when weird things happen, and if I can find even a plausible alternative, I brush it off and don't consider it paranormal. So, please keep that in mind. The first experience that truly made me consider the supernatural happened about 2 years ago. My boyfriend and I lived together in a small house that was built in the 1950s. When I moved in, I was warned that strange things happened around the house, but I didn't take it seriously until I started sensing a presence next to me. Even though no one was there, I mostly ignored it. At that time, we also had a friend staying with us. He's unfortunately very sensitive to spirits and even keeps a protective pendant on him because of it. One night, while he was cleaning the pendant, it fell onto the floor of our computer room. He looked for it but couldn't find it, so he asked if I'd look after I got off work. I agreed and started searching when I got home around 6:15 p.m., but no luck. I even checked if it might have fallen into a vent, but there was no sign of it. Later, I took his mail downstairs to his bed in the basement, almost directly below the computer room, and figured I'd have to apologize for not finding the pendant. Later that night, he came upstairs and thanked me. Assuming he meant for the mail, I apologized for not finding his pendant. But then he said he found it neatly placed on his bed, right next to the mail. There was absolutely no way it could have landed there on its own, even if it had fallen through a vent. And given that we've known this friend since kindergarten, I'm sure this wasn't a prank. Before this incident, I'd had another strange experience when I first moved in. While doing laundry, I found the large, flat plastic attachment from our vacuum in the washing machine, along with its filters. The filters made some sense, but the attachment was so large that I would have noticed it when loading the laundry. It should have made a loud noise in the machine, but I hadn't heard anything at all. 2 more recent experiences have been unsettling enough to bring me to tears. The first happened a few months ago. I was in the living room watching a show while letting our sugar gliders play. I was standing on the carpet, but behind me was the hardwood floor of the dining room. Suddenly, I felt someone walk up behind me, stopping just inches away. It felt exactly like when my boyfriend comes up behind me for a hug. The weight, the shift of footsteps, and the closeness, as if I should have felt their breath on my neck. I even hoped for a second it was, until I turned around and saw him in the other room, focused on his game. Real terror hit me when I found no one behind me. The sensation had been so real that I couldn't even describe it properly. Then, just last night, I had another encounter. I've only physically felt something once before, and that time it felt like a cat climbing into my lap, but we don't have any free-roaming pets. Definitely no cats. Last night, I went to bed around 11 p.m., all cozy under the blankets, when suddenly, I felt a hand grab my leg and yank it hard enough to pull it out from under the covers. The instant I felt it, I panicked, shaking and kicking, but it vanished just as quickly. I honestly don't know what any of this means or if it even does mean anything. All I know is that these experiences make you question your sanity pretty quickly. It's frightening, and I'm not sure who I can talk to about it without being looked at like I'm crazy. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My story starts in late August, when 5 friends and I moved into a large, old rental house just across from campus. It was the ideal undergrad setup, spacious, affordable, and full of character. Perfect for college parties, with 6 bedrooms so we each had our own space. The house was huge with 4 floors, a creepy basement, a second floor with 4 bedrooms, where all the girls, including myself, stayed, and an upstairs that looked like old servants' quarters where 2 of the guys lived. The house was definitely old. My dad thought it was from the mid-1800s. The living room didn't even have light fixtures, and there was no garbage disposal in the sink. But the previous owners had added a few updates, including a security system, which is at the heart of this story. The security system not only sounds an alarm if someone breaks in, it also announces when the front or back doors open with an automated voice that says, "Front/back door open." Since we go to college in a city with a rough reputation, this system made us feel a bit safer, especially since our house is on the edge of a tough neighborhood. Funny enough, the very thing that was supposed to give us peace of mind soon had the opposite effect. It was Christmas break, and most of my housemates were out of town, leaving just me and one other roommate, Mike. The night it happened was sometime between Christmas and New Year's. I'd been working a lot of evening shifts at a nursing home, so I often wasn't home until late. I hated being alone in the house at night, so I'd sometimes hang out at a friend's apartment after work to avoid the creepy, empty house. On this particular night, I was off work and hanging out downstairs, cooking and listening to music when I suddenly felt it. That weird, uneasy sensation I sometimes got in the house at night, like someone was watching me. It was less like fear and more like a commanding presence, almost like a parent telling you to go to your room. Not mean or threatening, but firm and territorial, as if the space wasn't mine. Usually, I just close my laptop and head upstairs whenever the feeling got too strong. This time, I decided to test it. I called out, "Look, I know you don't like me down here, but I'll be out of your way soon, so just leave me alone for now." Right after that, I felt a tightness in my chest, like I was lightheaded and breathing was a little harder. I ignored it as best I could, but it was unsettling, so I left soon after to meet up with some friends. A few hours later, I came home, feeling a bit buzzed but not drunk, and still able to go through my bedtime routine before lying down. As I lay there, I heard sounds I knew well, the old house settling and creaking. Then I heard something unusual. Footsteps, along with the familiar clicking sound of dog paws on the floor. One of my housemates had a dog, and I knew the sound well. But she and her dog were out of town for break. It was creepy, but I was tired and thought, I'm too tired for these ghost shenanigans right now, and tried to fall asleep, but that wasn't the end of it. About 30 minutes later, I heard front door open, followed by the sound of the door slamming shut and hurried footsteps running through the house. It sounded like someone in a rush, grabbing something, then bolting out the back door, which slammed shut too. I lay there thinking, what the hell, Mike? Since he was the only one who could be doing this. I waited, expecting him to come back inside. But he didn't. Minutes passed, turning into half an hour before I finally heard back door open and Mike's footsteps calmly coming up the stairs. The next morning, one of my other housemates had come back from break, so I told her and Mike about the footsteps and the dog paw sounds. Then I asked Mike about his late-night visit. He looked at me, totally confused, and said he hadn't run through the house or gone back out. He had come home once, locked up, and gone straight upstairs to bed. Wondering if maybe it had been an intruder, I asked if the doors were locked when he got home. He confirmed they were. We all fell silent. I could tell they didn't quite know what to make of it, though some of my housemates later chalked it up to me being tired or too tipsy. But I know what I heard. I wasn't asleep, and I know what it's like to be groggy. I was fully awake and felt the tremors when whatever it was ran through the house and slammed the doors. Since then, we've had other strange occurrences in the house, but this one has stuck with me the most. The ghost has become a running joke between us. We even call it the seventh housemate and joke about making it pay rent. While it's unsettling, it doesn't feel threatening, just very assertive, like it has a claim to the place. Part of me wants to investigate further, but I worry that stirring things up might make things worse. For now, I think we'll just try to keep the peace. This story took place over several months. Being in the military, I'd moved to Kansas the previous year, and when my first rental lease ended, I decided to switch houses. The new place was a bit smaller with a smaller yard, but it was on a quiet, nearly deserted street. Out of the 9 houses on our street, only 4 were occupied. The rest belonged to an elderly couple who used all but their own home to hoard things, with clutter visible through the windows. One day, I had a group of friends over, and while we were all hanging out in the kitchen, the only female in the group suddenly looked out the window, focusing on the house next door. She got a vacant look on her face and softly said the building made her uncomfortable, that it frightened her. Her comment caught my attention. I'd never been able to relax since moving in, always feeling as though the windows were watching me. After that day, I started noticing strange things, particularly with my 2-year-old daughter, Freya. Freya spoke well enough to communicate simple ideas, and she began running away from windows at random times, screaming and flinging herself at me. When I'd ask what was wrong, she'd say, "Papa scared me." Papa was what she called my father-in-law, who lived with us, but every time she reacted like this, he was in another part of the house or even at work. This happened day and night, and she'd react this way toward windows, doorways, even the skylight. On several occasions, while I was getting her out of her car seat, she would stare at the house next door. When I'd ask her what she was looking at, she'd say, "I'm looking at him," and point. But there was nobody over there, and the front windows were boarded up. As time passed, I began seeing strange things too. Glimpses of figures walking up and down our street or perched in the trees. They always appeared as shadows with no distinct features, and they would vanish the moment I tried to focus on them. Sometimes, while passing through doorways, especially outside, I'd feel waves of dizziness, which happened occasionally inside the house too. The worst experience happened one day when I was in Freya's room, changing her diaper. She never liked staying in her room at night, even with a nightlight, and we often found her huddled on the couch under a blanket by morning. As I was changing her, I felt a sense of unease but tried to ignore it to get her dressed. I suddenly felt a faint breeze brush against the back of my neck and assumed it was the curtain behind me. Then Freya looked past me, frowned, and said very clearly, "Papa, don't touch Daddy." Not long after, I decided to renew my practice of Wicca. I'd pushed it out of my mind since high school due to a stepdad whose intense faith had driven him near mad, making me resentful of all beliefs. But I felt drawn back to it now. I didn't believe Papa was malicious, but we took the time to cleanse and protect our home. Afterward, Freya stopped mentioning what she saw, and her behavior returned to normal. I'm writing this on October 20th. Over the past week, I've sensed those shadowy figures in my mind rather than my sight, as though they're lingering on the edge of my thoughts. But Freya hasn't shown any changes, and I believe she's still safe. My story begins with a mobile home I lived in from 1989 until spring of 2000. I bought it from neighbors up the road, with whom I'd been close for years. Growing up, I'd spent a lot of time at their house as best friends with their youngest daughter. Her family had originally bought the home new in 1972. It was a unique 20 by 50 manufactured home by Magnolia that folded down to 14 by 50 to be moved as a single wide, ideal for their military family of 6. My friend had shared with me that her oldest brother had committed suicide sometime between 1972 and 1976, though she didn't go into detail. She did mention that it hadn't happened in the home, but rather while they were living further north. I remember her mentioning his high school colors, blue and white, and that he was blonde, details that would come to matter later. After my ex-husband and I bought the home and moved it to my parents' farm, strange things began happening almost immediately, mostly affecting me and my daughter, who was 6 at the time. One of the earliest incidents happened while my daughter was playing quietly in her room. Out of nowhere, she let out a blood-curdling scream, ran into the living room, and practically climbed up onto me, glancing back as though being chased. It took 10 to 15 minutes to calm her down enough to explain. She said 2 small, fluffy dogs had entered her room, one darker than the other, and both see-through. Terrified, she didn't want to go back in, but reluctantly let me carry her to check. I found nothing. Afterward, I showed her a book of dog breeds, and as soon as we got to the Pomeranian page, she pointed and exclaimed, "That's them!" Unbeknownst to her, my friend's family had owned 2 Pomeranians, one darker than the other, who had passed away years ago. I reassured her that they'd been friendly dogs and would never hurt her. While I never saw the dogs as she did, I often glimpsed something small and low moving from her brother's old bedroom to her room, always in my peripheral vision. Sometimes I'd also smell a strong odor of dog urine and feces in the kitchen, a place where, years earlier, the family had kept the dogs. Oddly, we had no pets at the time. There were other strange smells, too. Once, the hallway where our washer and dryer were located suddenly reeked of beer. The smell would disappear within minutes, yet we didn't have any beer in the house. My nephew smelled it too, so I knew it wasn't just me. One night, after tucking the kids in and going to bed myself, I was jolted awake by my daughter's scream. I ran to her room, finding her pressed into the corner of her bed, clutching her blanket. Through her tears, she explained she'd turned over and seen a big, white dog with one eye resting its chin on the edge of her bed, just watching her. The description matched another pet the family had, a white German shepherd who'd lost an eye from a horse kick. He, too, had passed long before we moved in. Another night, after tucking the kids in, my daughter asked for water. I left her light on and went to the kitchen. When I returned, she asked why her cousin Jay had been standing in her doorway, wearing his school jacket but with wrong colors. I assured her Jay wasn't there, but she insisted she'd seen him standing in the doorway, staring. The only explanation I could think of was that she'd seen my friend's older brother. His school jacket had been blue and white, similar to her cousin's jacket, though his was blue and gold. She may have seen a full-body apparition. The thought gave me chills. She also sometimes complained about something unseen sitting on her chest while she tried to sleep. Moving her bed seemed to resolve that issue. We all occasionally heard footsteps, or rather, the creaking of the floor as if someone were walking. They'd start outside the bathroom door, move toward the living room, and stop just outside the dryer. They always started and stopped in the same place and never went in the other direction. Family and friends witnessed it, too, often standing still to listen in stunned silence. Once we added a cat and a small dog to the household. They, too, would hear the floor squeaking and would stare down the hall at the sound, eventually giving up when no one came. From the start, I'd often feel like I was being watched while washing dishes, my back to the dining room. So many times I'd turn around, thinking it was one of the kids. I even started calling, "What?" to the empty room or turning quickly and saying, "Boo!" but no one was ever there. It was an intense feeling, like a young boy was standing just inside the dining room. Even my mom experienced it so strongly that she refused to come into the house unless I was home. One night, a friend babysat for me and decided to lie down on my bed after the kids were asleep. She said that as soon as her head hit the pillow, it sounded like someone heavy was stomping down the hallway, stopping right outside the open bedroom door. She was terrified and left soon after. Months later, I had the same experience myself. Heavy footsteps from the living room, stopping right outside my bedroom. Shaken, I got up to check the locked house, but nothing was there. The most unsettling experience happened in the yard one winter night. My ex was adding wood to our outdoor stove, and I was standing nearby when I heard someone whisper in my left ear. I couldn't make out any words. It was just a fast, frantic whispering, right up close. Startled, I jumped, letting out a reflexive sh*t. As I reacted, I saw a tall shadow pass by the narrow yellow plexiglass window in the back door. I ran into the house, panicked, thinking someone was inside with my kids. After searching, I found nothing, and my ex joined me to check again, but the house was empty. Later, I tested the window and realized the shadow had been too tall for any of us to make. I'm not sure if the whisper outside was a warning or just coincidental with the shadow. Whatever it was, it whispered to me one more time on the steps as I was unlocking the door late one night. I even heard it in my bedroom once. To this day, I avoid going out in the yard after dark. I think this happened back in 2005. Yes, I know I really should start a journal for things like this. I was at work one night, working an overnight shift, when I started feeling really sick. I decided I wouldn't be able to finish my shift, so I left around 2 a.m. I had a half-hour drive back home through rural roads, so I arrived around 2:30 a.m. I remember it was mid-April. As I pulled up to the house, I turned off my headlights and noticed something strange through the dining room window. A swirling light inside the house. It was mostly white, but with a strange red hue mixed in, almost like a drop of red food coloring swirling in clear syrup. The light was about 4 to 5 feet high and around 3 feet wide at the thickest point. It wasn't shaped like a person but was narrower at the top, tapering toward the bottom where it disappeared from view. I sat there, staring in disbelief, trying to explain it logically. I thought maybe the brake lights reflecting off dust on the window might have created the effect. But when I took my foot off the brake, the light remained, clearly inside the house. I watched, completely freaked out, as it glided from the edge of the living room into the dining room and then out of view toward the kitchen. The glow softened and faded as it disappeared from the window. Finally, I gathered enough courage to get out of my SUV and walk up to the door. I entered the utility room, took a deep breath, and opened the door to the kitchen. Pitch black. Nothing was there. I looked to the right, down the hall toward the master bedroom and bathroom, and then to the left, into the dining and living rooms. Nothing. I went through the whole house, turning on lights as I went, checking closets, cabinets, every corner. Everything was undisturbed, but I was too shaken to go to sleep as I'd planned. When I picked up my husband from work that morning and told him what I'd seen, he brushed it off, saying it must have been the computer monitor casting light. But the monitor was off, totally dark when I came in, and that wouldn't explain how the light had moved. He claims to be a skeptic, though he's seen some things he can't explain. In August of that year, I became disabled and was home alone while my husband continued working the overnight shift. Maybe a year or two later, as winter approached and the trees had lost most of their leaves, he experienced something strange too. Driving home in the early morning, he could see multicolored lights shooting out from our windows, visible even from a distance. He thought, "What's going on? Is she having some kind of party?" He said it looked like lights from a rock concert and could still see them under the door as he stepped into the utility room. But as soon as he put his hand on the doorknob to enter the kitchen, everything went pitch black. When he came in, I was sound asleep and had been for hours. We don't own anything that could create lights like that. He saw the lights one more time a year or so later. But by the time he pulled into the driveway, they had vanished again, and once again, I'd been sound asleep. Curious, I even asked my mom if she'd ever seen anything like that on the farm. She's lived here since 1959, and she said no. I've lived here most of my life and had never experienced anything remotely like this either. This is our fourth mobile home since I moved back to the farm in 1986. I've had strange things happen in every home, but this is the only one where we've seen these lights. This home was brand new, straight from the factory, so there shouldn't be any leftover spirits from previous owners. Interestingly, our previous home was parked in the exact same spot and was also new, yet no lights ever appeared in that one. Has anyone else experienced something like this? I've been puzzled for years and have never come across anyone with a similar story. Oh, and my husband? To this day, he insists both times he saw the lights it must have been the computer monitor, even though it wasn't on either time. Hardcore skeptic. In 2008, I began a remodel on a house I planned to rent. Within the first few weeks, things took a turn, and I should have known to walk away, but instead, I found myself drawn into a spiritual battle that would change my life forever. At first, it was small, strange things. Motion detectors going off without reason, boards falling over as I walked by, and moisture inexplicably seeping up from the floor in the center of the house. But it quickly escalated. Soon, I was hearing fluttering wings, and a strange white powder began seeping through cracks in the walls and flooring. Each time it happened, I'd leave, return the next day, and try to push through. I was determined to finish what I started. I'm a stubborn person, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. One day, I noticed something disturbing. The bean pods from a locust tree scattered around the house were all pointing directly at it. I called the landlord, who initially thought I was overreacting. But after I explained everything, he suggested it might be an animal under the house and hired someone who specialized in animal removal. The man set traps baited with Vienna sausages, but after a week with no results, he vanished without a word, leaving his traps behind. Neither the landlord nor I ever heard from him again. At that point, I tried everything I could think of to catch or eliminate whatever was causing this chaos, but nothing worked. I finally gave up on the restoration, handed the keys back to the landlord, and unfortunately lost a friend in the process. Now it's 2014. I've moved 3 times since, but whatever this is, it has followed me, making my life a constant struggle. I have photos and videos of this energy, and knowing it's there scares me endlessly. I pray every night for Jesus to free me from this, but so far, I'm still dealing with it. The stress is taking a toll on my health, and I've had to accept that trying to capture or destroy it is pointless. I've turned fully to faith, reading the Bible as often as I can, believing that I have control over this entity, though I'm convinced it's demonic due to the immense energy I've seen. Suicide isn't an option. I refuse to end up like these things. I see them wherever I go, and I hold out hope that this trial will one day end. If anyone reading this has experienced something similar, do not do what I did. Don't engage with them, don't talk to them, and don't acknowledge them. I have 6 years of experience dealing with this, and I know what I'm saying. I've undergone MRIs, blood work, and even tests for long-term syphilis, which can cause hallucinations, all to rule out any medical causes. I even spent 5 days in a mental health facility for depression and trauma, but never once did a clergy member come to speak with me. I am just as sane as I was before this began, and I have the evidence to prove it. If anyone can help me get my life back, I am pleading for assistance. I currently live in Ellsworth County, and I open my door to anyone willing to investigate this with me. Let me start by saying that I've always believed in the paranormal, but usually keep in mind that, most of the time, there's a logical explanation for strange events. That said, I also think there are some things in life beyond our understanding, no matter how much we'd like to find a rational reason. Over the years, I've had a handful of strange experiences, and I hope to share more of them. But for now, I'd like to focus on something that happened to me recently. About 6 months ago, I started a relationship with a young man who had just completed his service in the Marine Corps. Over time, he's shared a few personal stories from his experiences overseas, including the death of his best friend, who was killed in combat. During a firefight, they were taking cover when a bullet struck his friend right next to him. He couldn't pull him down in time, and his friend died in his arms. Since returning home, My boyfriend has had recurring dreams of his friend following him, still dressed in his blood-stained uniform. One time, during a heated argument with his father, he slammed his hands on the counter and shouted, "Damn it, Dad, I've had enough." Just then, a bag of flour on the counter exploded. His father, a preacher, refuses to talk about it to this day. Though my boyfriend hates to admit it, he thinks his friend might be following him, with small, unexplainable incidents happening here and there. That background brings me to my own recent experience. A few nights ago, around 11:30, we were at my apartment getting ready for bed. My living room is small and opens to a kitchen with a hallway leading to my bedroom, which is the first door on the right. You can almost see into the living room from my bedroom doorway. We'd just been watching TV, and after deciding to call it a night, we lay down to sleep. About 10 minutes later, he got up to get a drink of water. I watched him walk down the hall and pause at the end, staring into the living room. Then he called me over. When I asked why, he just repeated himself, so I got out of bed to see what was going on. He was pointing at the small black clock above my TV, which was now face down on the floor, about 3 feet from the wall. I walked over to pick it up, and to my surprise, the time had been set to exactly 3 o'clock. It's an analog clock, so it wasn't digital, and the battery was missing. We tried to figure out how it could have ended up there, especially since if it had fallen, we would have heard it. It's loud when it hits the floor. We'd been lying in bed just 10 feet away, and the clock was fine when we left the room at 11:30. The battery was nowhere to be found. With nothing else we could do, we just tried to ignore it and went back to bed, though admittedly, a little creeped out. We searched the apartment, found no one else there, and made sure the door was locked. The next night, we were outside my front door talking and sharing a cigarette. I live in an apartment complex with a ledge and railing for the neighbors upstairs. As we stood there, we overheard them talking about how their black lab had been growling nonstop at a closet door the night before. Shortly after, one of the women from the upstairs balcony mentioned that 2 of the men in their apartment had seen a figure reflected in their mirror, a man in dress blues, the Marine Corps dress uniform. These were guys who normally brush off the paranormal, yet they were clearly shaken. This whole experience makes me wonder, was it his friend? And if so, why now? Why would he have set the clock to exactly 3 o'clock? Supposedly the witching hour when spirits are most active. Was it a prank? A hello? Or something more? And if it was him, why would he appear to my random neighbors upstairs, whom we've never even spoken to? The only explanation I can come up with is that I had been under some emotional stress that week regarding my boyfriend, and maybe his friend was trying to reach out to me in some way. Perhaps he sensed what I was going through and was trying to scare me straight. My boyfriend says his friend was a nice guy with a mischievous sense of humor, so part of me wants to believe it was just a harmless prank. But something tells me there was a reason behind this visit. And that clock set to 3:00. What does that mean? Whatever it was, you can believe I was wide awake until 3 a.m., waiting, heart pounding. But nothing else happened. This happened when I was around 15, just a day or two before Halloween. About as classic a setup as you can get for something creepy. A relative had recently bought a big plot of land in the middle of nowhere, and about a dozen of us decided to play a hardcore version of hide and seek out there. The rules were simple. One team plays the killers, and the other team, mine, plays the victims. The goal was for the victims to hide out in the woods all night and avoid getting caught by the killers. It sounds like the beginning of a horror movie in retrospect, but at the time it was just good, creepy fun. There were 7 of us on the victims' team, and because a few of us had been napping to prepare for the long night ahead, we got a bit of a late start. We were barely out the door when 2 killers appeared, running down the road toward us. Without a second thought, we made the sensible choice, running for our lives. Instead of heading behind the house like everyone else, we sprinted straight past a small pond out front, which, looking back, was probably our first mistake. We dove into a bank of bushes by a dirt road as one of the killers walked past, whistling a slow, creepy tune. He didn't notice us hidden in the brush and continued down the path around the pond. We took that as our chance and climbed up a hill next to the road. Deciding to avoid getting lost, we figured we'd walk in one direction until morning, so we kept moving. That was probably mistake number 2. I was with 3 guys. Let's call them Tom, James, and Mark. Mark forgot his phone back at the house and went to get it, leaving the three of us to stumble through the dark woods, guided by moonlight and the occasional scream echoing from the game behind us. We eventually crossed a barbed wire fence into a little valley. The place had an eerie vibe, like every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave. But we kept going. Around 3 a.m. we stopped to rest. Tom complained that James's white pants would make him stand out, so I covered them with my jacket. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Bored and a little on edge, I decided to look for a better hiding spot. That's when things got strange. As I walked along the edge of the valley, the feeling of being watched faded, until I noticed ashes scattered on the ground. I looked down, trying to make sense of them, when I suddenly walked face first into something hanging from a tree. I looked up to find myself staring at a strange doll-like figure, made of red yarn twisted into a human shape. I screamed, "What the FCK?" Asterisk. My whole body was telling me to run, and I was ready to listen. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that stopped me cold. Standing at the edge of the trees, watching Tom and James as they slept, was a woman. She was clear as day in the moonlight, yet somehow her features were hard to make out. I was frozen in place, feeling an icy wave of fear crawl up my neck. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. Took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. Then, as I stared, she turned and looked directly at me. I can't explain the fear I felt in that moment. We just locked eyes, and after a second, she drifted back into the forest without a sound. The silence was absolute. No animals, no wind, just nothing. I didn't even realize I'd started sprinting back toward the others. Panicked, I tried to tell them what I'd seen, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. They were older, around 20, but they could tell something had shaken me up, so we decided to end the game and head back. On the way back, I explained everything in detail. They brushed it off as a prank, but I could see they were uneasy. When we got to the house, everyone was there, either already found or having forfeited. Only a few people were still awake in the living room. Me, James, Tom, Rick, and another guy we'll call Mike. I tried to tell Rick and Mike what I'd seen, but before I could finish, Rick shared something that made me even more uneasy. Rick said that on his way out to meet us, he'd heard footsteps behind him and had felt like someone was watching him. He thought it was us playing a prank, but when he stopped to look around, there was no one there. Just retelling it here gives me chills. My relative eventually sold the property, but I went back once, hoping to prove to myself it wasn't real. But the second I got close, every fiber of my being told me to turn back. And I've learned to trust my instincts. I want to share my experiences from an apartment where I lived for 2 years with one of my best friends during college. At the time, I was going through a big transition, being away from home for the first time. I was excited but often felt scared, lonely, and unsure of myself. I describe myself as a sensitive person, highly attuned to the moods and personalities of others. I react deeply to emotions, and my gut feelings shape most of my actions. I often felt uneasy in the apartment, though my friend's presence usually helped. She was confident, supportive, and accepting, qualities I admired and wanted to develop in myself. There was one particular spot that disturbed me the most, the area right in front of the front door. I felt uncomfortable turning my back to it, chalking it up to a fear of intruders or an overactive imagination. The hallway and front entrance area sometimes had a distinct, unpleasant smell that would come and go. My bedroom was across from that space, and although I left the door open a crack at night so my cat could come and go, I used a small cat sculpture to keep it slightly ajar. It didn't weigh much, but somehow having it there made me feel a bit safer. Strange things would happen around the apartment from time to time. My cat often sat and watched things move that I couldn't see. I told myself he was just being a typical cat, perhaps watching bugs. But 3 times I saw what looked like a ghostly animal, maybe a cat. The first time, I was sitting on the couch late at night, working on a project for school with my cat sleeping beside me. I noticed a small blur, the color of burnt umber, move across the room. When I looked up, it vanished, and my cat was wide awake, staring at the same spot. The second sighting was also late at night. I just finished a project and was about to go to bed. The only light was a faint blue glow from my computer. I went to check that the front door was locked, and in the reflection of the computer screen in the window, I saw the outline of a long-haired cat. I turned to see my real cat, but when I turned back, the figure was gone, and my computer went to sleep, leaving me in total darkness. The third time, I walked into my room at night, and as I approached my bed, I saw a small, dark shadow leap off it and disappear. Other strange occurrences were frequent too. Stains would randomly appear on the carpet. Small items would vanish and reappear in obvious places weeks later, and my cat only played with a set of rocks that my grandparents had brought back from the island of Delos. He'd bat them around, knock them over, and even hide them, ignoring all the other rocks in my room. I often felt watched and would catch glimpses of shadows moving just out of sight. I tried not to think about it, telling myself it was all in my head. One evening, I came home to find a lamp turned on in that uncomfortable area near the door. We almost never used that lamp. I asked my friend, and she seemed unsettled. Being very logical, she tried to stay calm, saying that if it was a ghost, it only had power if we were afraid of it. Sleep paralysis also started happening, especially during naps. I'd wake up unable to move, hearing sounds like someone trying to open the front door or footsteps in the apartment. Sometimes I'd hear voices. My eyes would be open, but I couldn't move. I'd have to work my way out of it by wiggling my fingers, then toes, then legs, until finally I'd break free. Once, I woke up paralyzed and heard my friend's voice calling me. So I called back, hoping she'd come in and witness what was happening. The voice responded, but I quickly realized it didn't sound like her. When I said, "You're not Katie," the voice laughed and faded away, and I could finally move. I was terrified. During my time there, I became increasingly depressed. I stopped eating properly, grew very thin, and my grades began to suffer. I became withdrawn and irritable, skipping class and sleeping all day. It wasn't like me. Over Christmas break, I went home and immediately felt like my old self. When I briefly returned to grab clothes, the air in the apartment felt thick and heavy. I burned white sage before leaving again. When I returned for spring semester, I was barely home, busy with an exciting project for my design studio class. I felt happier and more confident than I had in months, and things seemed to improve. As we prepared to move out, the apartment felt eerie and unsettled, as if emptying it had disturbed something. The air felt heavy, and I had the sensation of being watched from the corners of the rooms. I was relieved to hand over the keys, leave, and never look back. Today, I live on the other side of campus. I still occasionally feel watched and catch glimpses of shadowy figures around campus buildings, a story for another time. But I'm in a better place emotionally and feel that I've grown from my experiences. I like to think I've become stronger because of it. Before moving out, I spoke with a neighbor who mentioned that the previous tenants had been very unpleasant and had kept many animals. She described them as gross people, and I can't help but think that the apartment may have held onto some of that negative energy. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The first strange experience I can remember happened soon after my grandpa passed away in 1999, when I was 9. My grandpa had served in World War II. He was a quiet, somber man with a dry sense of humor that I loved. After his death, my family found an old army bomber jacket of his. It had an earthy smell and a large dark red stain across the front, but I loved wearing it. We never questioned the stain. It just felt like part of him. When I was about 14, my mom and I moved to a small apartment in a new city. I treasured my grandpa's jacket and kept it carefully folded in a suitcase on a closet shelf. Not long after we moved in, I began hearing faint, beautiful instrumental music during the day when I was home alone. There were no radios on, and I could tell the sound was coming from downstairs, like someone had turned on music at a low volume. Whenever I'd go to investigate, the music would stop. One afternoon, my mom had left for work, and I briefly forgot she'd gone. I ran out of my room to ask her something. My bedroom was at the top of the stairs, and the stairs led down to a hallway that opened up into the kitchen and dining room behind the staircase. Standing at the top, I called, "Mom," and immediately heard a young girl's voice shout, "Hi," from the dining room behind the stairs. That's when I remembered I was home alone. I froze, then dashed back to my room, locking the door. I knew for certain no one else was in the apartment. Our doors were locked as usual, and it wasn't the voice of anyone I knew. She sounded like a little girl, maybe under 10, calling out aloud, "Hi." It absolutely freaked me out. After that, things escalated. I'd be upstairs doing something when I'd suddenly hear someone picking up cereal boxes in the kitchen and shaking them, as if testing the noise they'd make. I'd freeze in my tracks, waiting for the courage to run back to my room and close the door. This happened several times. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt an odd, intense fear for no clear reason. I slept with my door open so I could see my mom's room across the hall, and I opened my eyes every now and then to check the room. That's when I noticed what looked like short, dark human figures peeking in from the hallway. I couldn't tell if there was just one or several, but I was terrified. I yelled for my mom, who just mumbled, "Go back to sleep." When I insisted I was seeing things, she got up, placed a rosary around my neck, and told me to try to sleep. Easier said than done. Another night, while lying on my back trying to fall asleep, I suddenly felt something like a large ball slowly rolling up my thigh. I froze, then threw my blankets off, frantically brushing at my leg. I couldn't find anything, but from that point on, I had recurring nightmares of waking up to a limp figure draped over my legs, keeping me from moving. It was terrifying. Another day, while doing something in the kitchen, I glanced up at the microwave, which was on a shelf. For a split second, I saw a man's face looking down at me. Not a reflection, but as if he were actually there, gazing at me with a calm, gentle expression. He was unfamiliar, not my grandpa or anyone I knew. I looked away, and when I looked back, he was gone. It wasn't frightening, but just strange. His face remains clear as day in my mind. Eventually, my mom and I moved again, this time into a newly built condo in a suburb of Wichita. I kept my grandpa's jacket in the suitcase, still admiring it and feeling close to him through it. My new bedroom had a cold, unwelcoming vibe, but I tried to ignore it. I kept a small lamp on all night, but sometimes I'd lie awake watching it dim, brighten, dim again, then brighten. It happened often enough that I'd leave to go sleep with my mom. One night, after I'd crawled into her bed, a tall floor lamp in her room suddenly flicked on. Whispering, I told her the light had turned on by itself. Groggy, she said the switch was probably broken and told me to turn it off. Terrified, I finally did and rushed back to bed, only to open my eyes and see a human-shaped shadow floating above me, staring down. I panicked, threw the covers over my head, and lay there until I finally peeked out gone. At the time, a boy who lived with us had the bedroom next to mine. The next morning, he told me he'd woken up to see white, see-through people walking into my room through my closed door, one after another, all night long. He hadn't known about my lamp experience. We were both shaken. After moving again, I haven't experienced much paranormal activity. Somewhere in all the moving, my grandpa's jacket got misplaced, and I wonder if maybe his spirit had attached to it. Growing up, I'd always had strange experiences here and there, but nothing like what happened during those years with my mom. In high school, I occasionally heard loud knocks on my closed bedroom door while napping, but when I tried recreating the sound by knocking on the door frame, I couldn't explain it. I was always home alone. Once, after turning out the light, I heard a loud, distinct woman's voice say my name. It sounded like it was right inside my room, about 6 feet from my bed. Startled, I turned on the light, frustrated, and shouted, "What was that?" I think I was more annoyed than scared. I even yelled, "I'm trying to sleep. What do you want?" After that, I slept with the TV on for a month. Though smaller things still happen occasionally, they're never quite as intense as those years with my mom. Interestingly, the new tenants of one of our old homes tracked me down on Facebook, claiming it was haunted. I might share that story sometime, but for now, thanks for reading. If you have any theories about those shadowy figures or why I seem to have these experiences, I'd love to hear them. This definitely won't be my last story, but for now, my fingers need a break. But this one took place in the same old trailer as Sentinel 2. At that time, my bedroom was in the farthest south room, taking up the whole back half of the trailer. The floor was patched up due to a broken water heater that had destroyed parts of it, and the back 2 windows were broken when we moved in, so the room often felt rough and exposed to the Great Plains winds. Amidst the patched-up floor, stacks of boxes, and freezing drafts, was my bed, a retro 80s waterbed with black leather side rails and a matching headboard. I actually loved that thing. I slept great in it at least until winter hit. Winter that year began mild, and I didn't mind the broken windows much, since I love being buried under a pile of blankets. But as temperatures dropped, things took a turn. The waterbed's heater eventually went out, and though I tried to tough it out, the bed became like a block of ice. One particular night, with frozen rain pouring down outside, I couldn't keep warm at all. The icy cold seeped into my bones, and I began shivering uncontrollably. I'm not sure I actually fell asleep that night. It was like my brain just switched off. What happened next was either a hypothermia-induced hallucination or a vivid dream. I found myself in a dark, cold room, lit by 7 pillars of light. Each pillar contained a figure, though I could only fully recall 3 or 4 of them. My spirit guide was there too, even though I couldn't see him. I could sense him, as I always do on other nights. He would stand by the doorway, close to the closet, watching over me. The first figure I remember was a little girl. She had blonde pigtails, bright blue eyes, and wore a light blue dress with a black and white plaid inlay. She couldn't have been older than 8, with her golden hair reaching to the middle of her back. Her eyes were wide and joyful, untouched by the world's harshness. As I took her in, a thought struck me. This was me. My sentinel confirmed it with a gentle nudge. It still unsettles me. If I was this little girl who died so young, how am I here now? Why would I come back if my life had been cut short? The second figure was an old farmer. He had thin shoulders, graying hair that receded in the same way mine does now, and he wore overalls with a plain white shirt. He looked like he'd lived his life under the sun and soil, weathered and content. He had a gentle smile on his face, a look of complete fulfillment, like he'd been ready when his time came. I remember thinking that when my own time comes, I'd like to go with that same sense of peace. The third figure was a soldier, clearly from World War II. His uniform told me he'd been a Nazi soldier, which was shocking to realize. He couldn't have been more than 25, and he bore the scars of his death. 3 large-caliber bullet wounds across his chest. His expression was one of disgrace, though I try not to dwell on what might have caused it. He had high cheekbones, sunken cheeks, and full lips, but his hollow eyes held a weariness from witnessing things he'd rather not have seen. He wore his uniform almost like a badge, or maybe more of a scarlet letter. The other figures were harder to place. They felt distant, more like shadows in the timeline than people I knew well. One was Nero and the other was Kublai Khan. I'm not sure if I was these people or if I was just around them in some way. I hope I wasn't Nero. One life with a heavy history was enough. That night was like watching an old film reel of fragmented memories, scenes from different lives. The vision ended, but the questions stayed. I'll keep sharing these glimpses, hoping that with each story, I find a little more clarity. Halloween has always been my favorite time of year. You get to dress up as spooky characters and load up on candy. What's not to love? My friends and I have kept up the tradition of trick-or-treating long after childhood, much to the disapproval of some. But in a small town, you find your own ways to make fun. Last Halloween, though, things went from playful to seriously frightening. Before I go on, I want to say that what happened was our own fault, plain and simple. So don't blame it on Wicca or the religion. My 2 friends, let's call them Friend A and Friend B, and I had just discovered Wicca a few weeks before. Friend B's mom was Wiccan, and she'd let us borrow some books to read since we were curious. That Halloween night, around midnight, we just returned from a visit to the local cemetery. We hadn't gone to disturb anything, just to admire the stones and enjoy the quiet. None of us left the car, but the spooky atmosphere left us excited. Back at my trailer, we were twirling glow sticks around and hanging out when we noticed the Wicca books that Friend B had brought over. Friend A, who was sensitive to energies and knew more about Wicca than the rest of us, suggested we cast a circle. For those unfamiliar, casting a circle in Wicca is a way to create a sacred space, usually for spell work or honoring deities. I didn't know much about it, but I figured it'd be fine. We gathered candles and sat in a circle on my living room floor, purifying the space and saying words that Frenda suggested. To this day, she won't tell me what those words meant, but I know now they weren't good. What followed taught me to never take these things lightly. A few nights later, I was home alone, eating supper and walking over to the couch. My mom's room is just off the living room, and as I passed, her bedroom door suddenly slammed shut. My heart pounded as I sat down on the couch, staring at the now closed door. I thought it had been closed already, but apparently I was wrong. Through the slightly open crack, I could see a pale white face with empty eye sockets peering at me from inside the room. I hoped I was imagining it. I looked away, opened my laptop, and messaged a friend who lived nearby, asking if I could stay the night. When she said yes, I shut my laptop and started gathering my things to leave. That's when I heard voices, both male and female, close by and far away at the same time. They were speaking a language I didn't understand. Too freaked out to stay, I left everything on in the house and bolted. The next night, Friend A and another friend, Friend C, came over to help me grab clothes for school. We were sitting on the couch when Friend C's phone suddenly buzzed with a text. She looked over at me, confused, and asked if I just messaged her. I told her no, showing her that my phone had been in my pocket the whole time. Her face went pale as she handed me her phone. The text read, "Do you hear the voices too?" That was it. We bolted. A couple of days later, Friend A and I went back to the house at night. I sat in a chair facing the couch where Frenda sat, both of us facing my mom's open bedroom door. As I stared into the room, I saw a shadowy figure peek out from behind the door frame, almost like it was waving at me. Hating to feel scared, I glared at it. I can't remember if it had eyes, and honestly, I'm glad I don't. As the shadowy figure looked at me, another shadowy form crawled up the wall and across the ceiling in my mom's room, almost like it was trying to show off. Frenda noticed my expression and asked what I was looking at, but for a few seconds, I couldn't bring myself to respond. When I finally told her, we wasted no time getting out of there. On the way to Friend C's house, I saw dark figures peeking out from behind trees, some even darting out briefly before hiding again, like they were playing a twisted game. The next day at school, I couldn't focus. I kept sketching those shadowy figures over and over. My mom had been at her boyfriend's the whole time this was happening, so I told her what was going on. She went into her room and prayed, and after that, nothing else happened. But even now, I avoid her room, especially at night. I've had paranormal encounters before, but none as terrifying as this. That night taught me a lesson. Never mess with things you don't fully understand. I've always been able to communicate with spirits, and here's one memory I'll share. To explain it fully, I need to tell you about the spirits involved and the history that unfolded. This happened in my current house, so let me describe the layout. When you enter the front door, there's a coat closet straight ahead. Turn left, and you're in the front room. To the right, there's a hallway leading to the bedrooms and bathroom. At the back of the front room is the kitchen, which has a door to the garage. One evening, I was sitting on the floor chatting with my father, which was rare in itself. Mid-conversation, my father's face changed. It went pale, his eyes transfixed on the hallway behind me. I turned to look and saw a shadow quickly pull back, as if hiding from view. I smiled, recognizing the spirit of a young boy, about 5 years old, with sandy brown hair, blue eyes, and wearing old-fashioned coveralls and sturdy shoes. He's one of the sweetest spirits I've encountered, though every time I looked at him that night, he'd shyly duck back behind the wall. For some reason, he let my father see him more clearly than he let me. The next night, however, I encountered his grandfather's spirit, an experience I'll never forget. I didn't see him, but I heard his booming voice. Despite its age, His voice was thunderous and commanding. This man was harsh, especially toward women, whom he saw as needing to mind their own business. But stubborn as I am, I ignored him and kept talking with the boy. I learned that his death had been an accident caused by his grandfather. And, for those of you with big hearts, this next part may be hard to take. The more I spoke with the boy, the more I uncovered. I asked about his mother, a sensitive topic for him but someone he often mentioned. Then that chilling voice of his grandfather echoed again, telling me to stop asking questions. Naturally, I didn't listen and continued pressing. That was when the boy showed me the tragic events that led to both his and his mother's deaths. Through my own eyes, I saw the memories of that terrible day. His father had been a heavy drinker, and his grandfather didn't believe his mother could raise a child on her own. So, the grandfather took it upon himself to take the boy. But the boy's mother, in true motherly instinct, fought back to protect her son. Losing his temper, the grandfather turned on her and, tragically, beat her to death right in front of the boy. But the boy didn't just stand by, he tried to intervene, grabbing his grandfather's arm to stop him. In response, the grandfather shoved him aside, causing him to fall and hit his head on the wooden floor, fracturing his skull. And that was the end for the boy, his mother, and their family. Hearing this and witnessing it through the boy's memory broke me. I could hear him crying out, begging his grandfather to stop, pleading for his mother. Even now, recalling it makes me want to cry. It was haunting, and the pain in his voice has stayed with me. I know some parts of this may sound made up, especially since I only refer to him as the boy. But even spirits deserve to keep some parts of their lives private. He didn't want his name shared, so I respect that. The boy's mother has since crossed over and found peace, and the grandfather was eventually forced to leave, despite his protests. He was not someone we wanted around. But the boy remains here, full of light, and he sometimes plays little hide-and-seek games with us. I catch glimpses of him out of the corner of my eye and see him smiling at me from time to time. He's a wonderful little soul whose life ended far too soon. I grew up in a university town in northwest Kansas. When I was about 8, my grandparents bought an old, unique house there for a very low price and let my mom and me live in it. My mom's boyfriend and his 3 daughters later moved in with us. The house was large, spacious, and over 150 years old, one of the first 5 houses built when Foothays was established. With its multiple floors, basement, and crawlspace attic, it had an eerie charm that made it look straight out of a Halloween cartoon. Even the neighborhood kids avoided it on Halloween. It was just that kind of place. At 12, I started noticing more of the strange occurrences around the house. I wanted my own space, so I decided to move into the basement to get some privacy. Big mistake. One night, I heard loud noises from the storage area next to my room, like boxes being moved around. Assuming it was the cat, I opened the door and saw a soldier standing there, moving things around. I shot out of that basement, ran upstairs to my stepsister's room, and crawled into her bed, seeking refuge in her bed tent, hoping it would somehow protect me. Strange things continued, like the stereo turning on by itself, or laundry mysteriously folding itself right in front of us. Then, when my stepsisters moved out with their dad, I took a room upstairs, directly to the left at the top of the stairs. This was the summer of 1991, and one night, I was woken by the sound of glass shattering. I looked to my right and saw the picture of a Navy aircraft carrier fall, but only after the glass had already broken. That's when I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. As I watched, a huge black shadowy figure appeared in my doorway. It was like he paralyzed me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, even as I tried to call for my mom. I was so terrified that tears streamed down my face, and eventually, I even wet myself. The shadow entered my room, shut the door, and started throwing things around, as if frantically searching for something. I felt like I was going to die, convinced I'd have a heart attack at just 13. After what felt like an eternity but was probably about 10 minutes, the figure calmly opened the door, walked downstairs, and left through the front door. When I finally screamed for my mom, she came in and assumed I'd destroyed the room myself in some kind of sleepwalking episode. One Halloween, I hosted a party in the basement, and we were taking pictures of each other in the dark with disposable cameras. In one shot, you can clearly see the faint figures of a young boy and girl hanging from the rafters by nooses, almost as if they were siblings. The photo, which my mom still has, remains one of the creepiest things I've ever captured on film. By 1994, I was 16 and had my first son. One day, when he was about 3 months old, I was tidying up the living room while he napped peacefully in his playpen. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. From the direction of the fireplace, I heard eerie voices whisper, "Listen to the baby cry." Right then, my son let out a blood-curdling scream. I grabbed him, packed his diaper bag, and drove straight to my grandparents' place, unwilling to stay a minute longer in that house. Over the years, lights would turn on and off by themselves, objects would move on their own, and one time the TV flew off its stand, directly at my mom. She still refused to believe in the paranormal, though I never understood how she could explain that away. To this day, I consider that house even more terrifying than the Amityville house. About 10 years ago, my grandparents sold the place to a high school classmate of mine and her family. They lived there for only 2 years before selling it. She later told me she can't even drive past the house now without feeling a deep sense of terror. I haven't set foot in that house since moving out, and I haven't experienced anything remotely like it since. But I'll never forget the horrors I faced in that house as a kid, and I can only wonder what the current residents might be going through. I'm about to complete my second and final year of living in Morse Hall, one of the dormitories at my college. Before moving in, I'd never heard any ghost stories or strange happenings related to the building. But after settling in, I began hearing tales about students who had died. Some naturally, others by accident or suicide. Apparently, Morse Hall has a reputation for being haunted. To set the scene, let me explain the layout. The building is divided into 5 sections: Northeast, Abigail, Central, where I live, South, and Southeast. The Northeast, Abigail, and Central sections are connected by hallways, while South and Southeast are only connected to the rest via a hallway on the ground floor. There's an elevator in Northeast, Central, and Southeast, and there used to be one in Abigail, though the shaft is now boarded up. Now that you know the layout, here are some of the stories and experiences I've had or heard about in Morse Hall. First, there's the abandoned elevator shaft in Abigail. Supposedly, a drunken football player once threw himself down it. People say you can sometimes hear banging noises coming from inside the shaft. I've walked by it countless times but haven't heard anything unusual. Then, there's the story of a basketball player who either died in a car accident or by suicide. She's said to haunt the 4th floor of Northeast, dribbling her basketball up and down the hallway at night. The strange part? People on the 4th floor don't hear it, but those on the floors below do. I lived on the 4th floor last year and never heard a sound, but now, on the 2nd floor, I have heard what sounds like a basketball bouncing in the middle of the night. There are also tales of students committing suicide in the closets of Abigail. The closets are the largest in the building, which has somehow given rise to these stories. A couple of my friends once watched a movie in one of those closets and swore they saw a face in the wall. Then there's the bathroom in ground floor Abigail, where people report hearing strange noises from below the sink, like pipes being unscrewed. I've heard it myself but usually dismiss it as old pipes, considering the age of the building. As for my own experiences, when I lived in 4th floor Central last year, strange things seemed to happen constantly. I'd hear noises above my ceiling, things dropping or rolling. Since I was on the top floor, it wasn't like someone was living above me and causing the noise. My posters would also fall suddenly, as if someone had torn them down. The windows would be shut, and they wouldn't fall slowly. They'd drop sharply, like they'd been yanked off the wall. The door to the room would move on its own as well, sounding like it was being pushed by wind, yet the window would be closed, and there were no cross-ventilating windows nearby. Other weird things would happen too. Strange noises in the room, things falling from shelves or inside the closet even when they hadn't been touched. Orbs also appeared in several photos I took in that room, though I'm skeptical about orbs since they can often be dust or light reflections. This year in 2nd floor Central, things have been quieter. I still hear the occasional basketball dribbling sound late at night, and some of my posters have mysteriously fallen, but that's about it. Morse Hall certainly has its stories, and while I haven't experienced anything extreme, the strange sounds and eerie happenings make me wonder about its history and all those who've lived here before. About 4.5 years ago, my friends and I decided to play with a Ouija board. It was the last day of our sophomore year in high school, and the four of us, me, Justin, Megan, and Snowy, left school early and headed to my house to hang out. Later, more people were supposed to come over to join us. As we were talking, one of us, I can't remember who, brought up ghosts and the paranormal, asking if anyone had ever used a Ouija board. None of us had, so someone suggested we go get one and try it out. I'd been feeling uneasy in my house lately. It was a big, unfamiliar place with strange noises that made me uneasy. So we all agreed to go ahead with it. We went to Spencer's, bought the board, and returned to my house, eager to try it out. Before starting, we made a pact not to move the planchette ourselves so we'd know if anything was really happening. We began with a simple question: is anyone there? The planchette immediately moved to yes. We all exchanged nervous glances, each of us asking if anyone was moving it, but everyone denied it. We continued with basic questions. What's your name? How old are you? Do you need something? It was strangely captivating, and we played with it all day until people started arriving at my house. Even then, we kept going, though the others were uncomfortable. I even got into a huge fight with one of my best friends, which was unusual since we'd never fought before. By the end of the night, only the four of us were left. At one point, we asked one of the spirits to move a friend's hair. There were no open windows and no nearby air vents, yet her hair began to move back and forth for about a minute. We were all freaked out. Up until then, every spirit we talked to seemed friendly. But then my friend asked the board a question about her mother, something about when she might pass away. Instantly, we felt a change in the planchette's energy, as if it had taken on a different presence. It responded to her question but then spelled out 1 and 8. 18. Confused, we asked what it meant. It responded that something would happen. We asked, to one of us? And it said, yes. Then we asked its name, and it replied, Tib. One of my friends instantly panicked and yelled, no, don't talk to them. She recognized the name and said she'd heard it was a demon. We were all terrified and took our hands off the planchette without saying goodbye. Realizing we were in over our heads, we decided to get rid of the board. We took it outside to a huge hill with a river at the bottom, intending to burn it, but it wouldn't catch fire. So we tore it up and threw the pieces down the hill into the river, including the planchette. As we did, one of my friends suddenly spun around, saying she saw a black figure run behind us. I didn't believe her at first, but then Justin said, no, Shelby, I don't think she's lying. Just then, we heard something stomping through the weeds behind us, and we all panicked and ran back to my house. We needed to go to Megan's house, so the four of us piled into Justin's car. On the way, we decided to throw the Ouija box out the window. It still had the instructions and most of the torn pieces inside. Back at my house, Justin eventually went home. None of us slept well that night, but nothing else happened until I was alone. I was in my room where we'd used the board, just watching TV, when something in the corner of my eye caught my attention. I looked over at a standing lamp, right where we'd played with the board. I watched as the lamp's cord was yanked out of the wall, turning off the light. That was it for me. I never went back into that room again. 2 weeks later, things had quieted down, so I went over to Snowy's house. While I was there, I reached into my pocket for something and felt crumpled paper. I pulled it out, and to my horror, it was the torn instructions from the Ouija board box we had thrown out of the car window. We freaked out. After that, little things continued to happen, and though it was unsettling, I eventually got used to it. But on September 19, 2009, something major happened. Snowy turned 18. 2 months later, she was killed in a car accident. None of us thought about the Ouija board's warning until months after her passing, when we remembered it had told us something would happen to one of us, and it had given us the number 18. Now, I can't help but wonder, was it just a coincidence? Or did the board really predict the future? My experience with the gates of hell was eye-opening and incredible. happening in a series of events I still can't fully believe. I've always felt that everything happens for a reason, and this experience only deepened that belief. One night, my friends and I decided to visit the cemetery out of boredom. It was the last day of our sophomore year, and we'd left school early. Before we left for the cemetery, I had taken some Klonopin, which often makes me black out, or, as I like to say, possessed. Because of this, I have no memory of our trip to the cemetery that night. A few nights later, I was outside, walking around my driveway while on the phone, when I saw something unforgettable. A green ball of light hovering close by. It was there for just a moment but definitely caught my attention. I mentioned it to a few people and brushed it off as something strange I'd seen. A few days after that, one of my friends called unexpectedly, asking if I wanted to go back to the gates of hell. Since I had no memory of the first trip, I agreed, curious to actually see it this time. We went during the day, nothing unusual happened, and I took a few pictures before we left. However, that visit sparked a curiosity in me about the place. I looked up the history and lore of the cemetery, and one of the main ghost stories surrounding it caught my eye. People often report seeing a green orb there, a light that floats upward and away. The match with what I'd seen near my driveway was eerie, even though my orb moved downward and then disappeared. My friend and I decided to return to the gates of hell once more, this time at 3 a.m. The night we went, it was foggy, and the air felt thick with energy. About 10 minutes away from the cemetery, our conversation took a turn. My friend revealed something about that first night we went, the night I don't remember. Apparently, while under the influence, I'd been knocking over tombstones, trying to destroy them. I have a history of blacking out on Klonopin, so I knew there was truth in her story. This was my demon taking control. But suddenly, things made sense. I had disrespected the tombstones at the gates of hell, and the green orb had followed me home to make sure I took notice. Realizing this just before arriving turned what was meant to be a casual ghost hunt into something far more serious. I knew I needed to make peace with whatever I had upset. We arrived, parked the car, and turned off the engine. Fog surrounded us for a few moments, as if it were observing us. I'd read stories of rituals being done here and people being chased off, so I was a bit on edge. The fog eventually lifted, and as I stepped out of the car, it was completely gone, and everything was silent. My friend, terrified, chose to stay in the car while I decided to make amends. I was surprisingly calm, without any fear. I felt that whatever the green orb represented, whether anger or disappointment, it was there to deliver a message. I'd also looked up the meaning of green in relation to orbs and read that it signifies friendly or healing energy, but that seemed based on aura colors and might not apply here. If anyone knows more about green orbs specifically, I'd love insight, so I tried to channel positive energy, explaining myself and asking for forgiveness. But in the middle of my apology, I heard movement in the woods. It had been dead silent up until then, and the sound of footsteps cracking branches was unsettling as they came closer. Realizing I was unarmed and unprepared, I quickly returned to the car and told my friend to drive us out of there. She sped out, clearly shaken, and on the way, she mentioned feeling a presence attached to the car. I didn't feel anything myself. After researching further, I found out about an entity called the Spook, a figure known to run people off from the gates of hell. I wondered if that was what happened to us that night. I worry that I didn't finish whatever I was supposed to do to resolve the situation. All I can do is hope that everything worked out as it was meant to. My advice? Don't mess with the gates of hell at Casey Cemetery in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. I'm a single mother of 3 kids, ages 8, 7, and 2. My oldest and I have always had a strong ability to connect emotionally with people, places, and even things, picking up on unexplainable feelings or energy. Recently, we moved into a house, no more apartment living. We were thrilled, but about a week and a half in, strange things began happening. I'll start from the beginning and go through what we've experienced so far. Soon after we moved in, I began to feel an overwhelming sadness, but only when I was in my daughter's room, going about our usual routines. I found myself focusing on her closet, feeling a sense of unease whenever I was near it. This sadness and fixation started shortly after we moved in. The next day, my son was playing with his paper guitar, which comes with a small drum pad that requires electricity to work. He switched to the drums, but before he even touched them, they turned on by themselves and started playing. Later, he joked that if it was a ghost, at least it had good rhythm. But when he realized it wasn't plugged in, he got scared and came running to find me. That night, he wouldn't sleep in his room, feeling like someone was watching him. Since then, he's been sleeping on his sister's floor or on the couch. For a few days, everything was quiet. But then one night, my boyfriend and I were trying to sleep when we heard cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen. We assumed one of the kids was up for a midnight snack or water, but when my boyfriend checked, everyone was sound asleep. No one was in the kitchen. We have a dog, Dexter, but he stays in the laundry room at night, and he isn't your average dog. He's unique, and in the nicest way possible. I'd say he's different. So it wasn't him in the kitchen. That same night, I woke up freezing and asked my boyfriend to turn the air down. When he came back, he asked, "Did you set the thermostat to 65? I always keep the house between 70 and 73, so I was confused." The next day, we asked all 3 kids if they'd changed it, but they all denied it and seemed genuinely honest. A few more days passed with nothing unusual, but then one night, as we were falling asleep, we heard footsteps coming from the hallway. My boyfriend checked, and again, everyone else was sound asleep, and Dexter was in the laundry room. At this point, I was getting fed up. I hate not being able to explain things, and it felt like this was just the beginning. One morning, I woke up and walked into the kitchen, only to find the front door standing wide open. Panicking, I ran through the house, calling for the kids, making sure everyone was safe. In my panic, I'd forgotten about the ghost issue and immediately thought maybe my 2-year-old had somehow opened the door in the night, were both deep sleepers, or that someone in the family was sleepwalking. Over the following week, this happened 3 times. Either the front or back door would be wide open in the morning. We started making sure the 2-year-old was asleep with us at night to be safe. But one night, I woke up to a loud voice in my ear saying, "Go get them." I'm a deep sleeper, so it takes a lot to wake me up, but I shot up in bed and immediately felt a strong sense that something was outside my window. I shook my boyfriend awake and had him check the house. He didn't see anything, though he looked a bit shaken. The next morning, as I was having coffee on the patio, I noticed the plants under my window were trampled, as if someone had been standing there. I freaked out at first, but then it dawned on me. The ghost might be trying to warn us. Whoever or whatever it was seemed to understand that I'd do anything to protect my family. In the last week alone, so much has happened. On May 30th, 2012, my family came to visit. My brother and his girlfriend stayed in my son's room, and my mom slept on the couch. The first night, my brother and his girlfriend felt something tugging at their blanket while they were asleep. The next day, my other brother felt a tap on his shoulder and heard a woman's voice say his name, even though he was home alone. Since I was worried about the doors being left open, my brother installed additional bolt locks at the top of each door, far out of reach for the kids. Now, every night we hear knocking on the door, but when we check, no one is there. This morning, I found the back door unlocked, although the extra bolt lock was still in place. I'm honestly not sure what to do, but it's getting annoying. Oh, and the ghost seems to like messing with us. It frequently trips the breaker to the microwave or changes the time on my alarm clock. For now, that's all I have to share, but I have a feeling this isn't over. If anyone has suggestions, I'd appreciate it. I don't want to upset or directly contact whatever is here, as I feel that might make it more active, but I also don't want things to escalate. I've had paranormal experiences before, but nothing as clever as this. Oh, and about 2 weeks ago, our dog, Dexter, mysteriously vanished. We have no idea what happened to him. I don't really know how to explain what's been happening, but I'll start with some basics. 5 years ago, when I was 14, my family moved into a brand new home. Our previous home, built in the 1960s, had its share of strange activity. My sister and I, she was 18 or 19 at the time, would often hear odd noises when we were home alone, day or night. Sometimes it was creaking, and once we heard what sounded like cereal or small objects scattering across the floor, followed by pans crashing down. But when we went to check, nothing had moved. Since I was often home alone, I experienced more than my sister did. Her bedroom door, which opened into the kitchen, would frequently swing open as I passed. Eventually, we had to replace the lock with a hook because it wouldn't stay closed. Even then, it continued to open on its own whenever I was alone, though it would always be closed again by the time my parents returned. I told myself it was just my imagination, though sometimes it felt like more than that. I always felt like I was being watched, but I brushed it off as paranoia. A friend of mine who believed in spirits insisted that explained everything, though I was skeptical. One night, things got weird while I was at her house. We were getting ready to sleep when the television suddenly turned off. The remote was next to it, and we both felt a light, feathery touch brush up our feet at the same time. My friend was especially frightened because she claimed she'd seen a face appear on the screen just before it happened. She drew it for me. A girl with short black hair, pale skin, and black eyes. As an artist, her sketch was quite detailed for her age. I wasn't convinced, though I pretended to believe her to make her feel better. Now, here's the part one really need to talk about. In this new house, I've been experiencing sensations, seeing things, hearing voices, and feeling strange touches. I don't know how to describe it well, but I feel like I might be going crazy. I'm skeptical by nature, and part of me thinks I could be developing schizophrenia or something. But that's why I'm here, to make sense of this. The experiences happen any time of day. I often feel like I'm being watched, and I catch glimpses of things that aren't there. Flashes of black or white in the corner of my eye. Sometimes these shapes look like people, animals like my dog or cat, or even bugs. I worry I'm becoming mentally unstable. And then there are the voices. I hear my sister's, my dad's, and even my mom's voices when no one has said anything. One time, I was doing dishes in the kitchen when I heard a loud pop behind me. Nothing had changed when I looked around, though. Another time, I woke up to the sound of my dad banging on my door, sounding angrier than I'd ever heard him as he yelled, "Get up, now." I yelled back, "I'm up," and rushed to the door, only to find the house completely empty. Another day, while doing chores in the kitchen, I heard my sister say, "I'm home," just like she usually does when she gets back. I called back, "I'll be there in a minute." But when I went to find her, her car wasn't there, and she hadn't been home at all. I also hear my mom calling my name, sounding like she wants something, but whenever I go to check, she hasn't called me. These occurrences happen at random times, mostly during the day. I've also heard a voice I didn't recognize, calling my name right as I was falling asleep. I think I've seen two figures in my bedroom. One was after a loud clap of thunder woke me suddenly, and as I sat up, lightning illuminated my room. In that flash, I saw a girl standing with her body facing my window but her head turned toward me, her eyes blank. She was gone by the next flash. It felt so unreal that I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But as I calmed down, I realized the girl looked exactly like the description my friend had drawn. Black hair, black eyes, skinny, and wearing a white dress, looking about 13 or 14 years old. Around that time, I was constantly scared at night and always kept the TV on as I fell asleep. I was chatting with another friend when I looked over and saw a blurry figure by my closet door, much taller than the girl I'd seen. I blinked, and it was gone. Another time, while lying in bed, I felt movement, like my cat climbing up beside me. I felt the covers pull as if something was crawling toward me, the mattress sinking in. When I turned, I saw a strange, mask-like face staring at me, something you'd see in a movie or at a carnival. I pulled the covers over my head, too terrified to look again. Lately, I've been experiencing sensations that go beyond feeling watched. I feel light touches, as if someone is pressing against me or even hugging me from behind. It mostly happens around my stomach or my side, from the same direction where I'd seen the face before. But it doesn't feel comforting, it feels unsettling. One night, I was in the car with a friend after a rough evening. It was extremely late, and I felt the presence from my room behind me. I ignored it, telling myself it was just my mind. But then, I felt hands slide up to my throat as if trying to choke me. There was no pressure, but my muscles tensed with the sensation. Afterward, I went home and continued feeling its presence the rest of the night. The house felt normal again after that, but soon the strange sensation started all over. Right now, I can feel it again, along with a strange pain on the back of my neck, like a small burning circle near my shoulder. I feel like tiny bugs are crawling on me randomly, and I sense it watching me from my desk chair across the room. I don't know if I'm hallucinating or if I'm experiencing something paranormal. I haven't been stressed lately, nor have I been thinking about anything paranormal. Well, until tonight. I've never taken drugs, legal or not, and I'm not on any medication. I just don't know what to think. A heartbreaking incident happened a few months ago. I lost my mother, who had been battling pancreatic cancer for over 2 years. Watching her go through such pain, I almost wished for her suffering to end peacefully. While that day finally came, the silver lining was that I got to spend her last 3 months by her side, and she passed away peacefully in my arms. I had quit my job to stay with her, and my wife took care of our kids. We were all together, supporting each other. Before I share my story, I want to say this to everyone. Spend time with your parents. They become like children in their final years, craving our attention, and there's no greater gift than being with them. They loved and cared for us, so we owe them the same in return. Now, going back to the story, during those last months, I caught up on all the time I'd missed with my mom. We talked for hours every day. She would share stories about our lives, even the little details I'd forgotten. One day, she grew emotional and told me how, as a child, I used to cry endlessly for my dad, who had passed away when I was young. Then, suddenly, she looked up and quietly said, "Only if he had listened to me." That shook me. I asked her what she meant. At first, she hesitated, but then she told me about something she had kept hidden her whole life. Story from my mom. Day 1. My parents shared a short but happy life together, and I was the result of that love. My mom told me that my dad used to tease her about her belief in the paranormal and her habit of reading tarot cards. Dad was a religious man who believed that fate had to be faced, not predicted. He was a hardworking man, often pulling long hours. Despite his refusal to discuss his troubles, my mom could sense something was bothering him. One evening, Dad opened up, telling her that he felt death was near, that he would be leaving his family soon. My mom reassured him that everything would be fine. The next day, she found Dad still asleep, which was unusual since he always left early for work. When he finally woke up, she asked him if he was all right. Dad shared that he'd had a dream of being trapped in a fire while people watched helplessly, unable to save him. Worried, my mom pulled out her tarot cards and read that the signs were unfavorable for his health. She begged him to stay home, but he brushed it off and left for work. He never returned. That day, a young driver ignored a stop sign and slammed into my dad's car from the left side. His car was crushed and caught fire, and he didn't survive. As my mom told me this, she looked at me, not shedding a single tear. She said, "I never wanted you to know because I didn't want you to feel sad about your dad. He was a great man, and so are you. He'd be proud of the gentleman you've become." I was overwhelmed, and I broke down, hugging her. Story continued. Day 2. A few days later, I couldn't hold back my curiosity. I asked her, "Mom, why did Dad suddenly feel that way? Why was he so scared and depressed?" She looked anxious, hesitated, and then opened up about what had happened. About a month and a half before his death, Dad was returning from work late one rainy night when he saw a young woman standing by an overpass. Concerned, he stopped and asked if she needed a ride. She told him she was lost after a walk and asked to be dropped at the nearby hospital. On the way there, she confided in my dad about her difficult childhood, sharing that her parents had died from drug abuse, leaving her with nothing. Dad, who had his own tough childhood, empathized with her and told her he'd visit her with our family so she wouldn't feel alone. Later, Dad told my mom about the encounter, and they decided to check on her that weekend. But when they arrived at the hospital, they learned she had died 3 weeks earlier, electrocuting herself. Shocked, Dad told my mom about meeting her only days ago. Together, they left the hospital, and on the way home, Dad stopped by the same overpass where he'd met her, looking unsettled. Then he turned to my mom, frozen, and whispered that he saw the girl standing right beside her. My mom was scared for him and stayed close to him after that. After this encounter, Dad was never the same. He'd wake up at night, drenched in sweat, gasping for air, saying that the girl was following him. My mom felt he'd attracted an entity, but whenever she tried to help, he resisted. After many attempts, she started praying for his health, but every time she prayed, something would disrupt her. Mom believed that my dad's emotional state and constant fear were drawing more negative energy to him. Before she could find a way to help him, he passed away. I felt a heavy sadness hearing all this. I didn't push my mom with more questions, but she quietly said, "I helped so many people in similar situations, but I couldn't help your dad. Since then, I have questions that I can't shake off. Why would a spirit follow someone and disturb their peace when they meant no harm? My dad only stopped to help, yet he suffered terribly. Maybe his accident was just coincidence. But why did such a kind and honest man have to meet that fate? Life can be incredibly cruel. Perhaps Dad was right. No matter how much we try to predict or prepare, we must face our fate, whether it's good or bad. And his fate was a tragic accident." This happened when I was 18 back in 2004. Over the years, I've had several strange, unexplainable experiences that made me believe in the spirit world. I've witnessed spirits, possessions, and even some peaceful send-offs before someone passed away. But despite all of that, I'd never actually come face to face with a spirit, which left me curious. So my friends and I, young and a bit reckless, decided to try to stir up the spirit world ourselves. As teenagers, we were always looking for ways to make some extra cash. We'd make wild bets with each other, coming up with challenges that seemed impossible. Once, when I needed some extra money, a few of my friends dared me to do something spooky. Sit alone on a tomb in a cemetery, smoke a cigarette, and not show any fear. No sweating, no shouting, nothing. If I could do that, I'd win some cash. They'd wait outside in the car while I did it alone. So we headed to Maple Grove Cemetery in Wichita, Kansas. But when we got there, my friends handed me a cigar instead of a cigarette, knowing it would last a lot longer. I hesitated at first, but when they added an extra $50 to the bet, I accepted. I walked over to a tombstone, lit the cigar, and sat down. At first, I was nervous, but as time passed and nothing happened, I started to relax. It took about 20 minutes to finish the cigar, and just as I was getting up, I felt a light tap on my shoulder. I froze but forced myself to turn around, and nothing. I didn't see anyone. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just my imagination, and started walking back to the car. But then, I heard footsteps behind me. I told myself it was just the echo of my own steps and kept going until I reached my friends. They handed me the $125 I'd won, and I felt pretty good. When I got home, I showered and went to bed, but something smelled awful in my room, like something had puked. I checked around, but couldn't find the source, so I just tried to ignore it and lay down. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move, but when I looked, nothing was there. Needless to say, I barely slept that night. The next morning, I felt exhausted and noticed strange fingerprints on my shoulder, clear as day. I got chills but didn't tell my mom, thinking it was better to face a spirit's wrath than hers. I called my friends to tell them, and they were shocked. None of them had experienced anything like that. Later, while I was alone in the kitchen making something to eat, I heard my bedroom door slam shut. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind. Then, as I was making a smoothie, I heard a low, angry grunt. I turned and saw a shadow slide out through the kitchen door. That was it. I'd had enough. I bolted out of the house and waited outside until my mom came home. When she arrived, I ran to her and told her everything. She was clearly unhappy with what I'd done, but instead of scolding me, she took the money I'd won and burned it. Then she brought out her tarot cards and lit some candles, making me sit in the center. She started murmuring something, and one by one, the candles went out. Once the last candle was out, she looked at me seriously and said, "Don't ever do that again." My mom explained that I'd brought the spirit of an old man back from the cemetery. He was angry that I disrespected him and was there to warn me not to do it again. She told me that doing things like this could attract a lot of negative energy, and sometimes the damage could be irreversible. To make things right, I went back to the cemetery with flowers, placing them on the tombstone and apologizing, even shedding a few tears out of fear and regret. I swore I'd never do something like that again, and after that I never saw the shadow or experienced any strange things again. At least until my next adventure with friends. When I was a teenager, about 18 years ago, I used to babysit for my neighbors, the Beckermans, who had 7-year-old twin boys. The kids were lively but well-behaved, and I enjoyed watching them. One Saturday, I was asked to babysit from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. I knew they usually went to bed around 9, which would give me some time to relax and watch TV. That evening, as I was getting the kids ready for bed, one of the twins asked if I could stay in their room until they fell asleep. He said he felt scared and that his mom usually stayed with them until they dozed off. I agreed and started telling them a bedtime story. But soon after I began, I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was strange, because Mrs. Beckerman wasn't due home until 11, and it was only around 9:15 p.m. I called out her name, but there was no answer. My curiosity got the better of me, so I stopped reading to the kids and went to check. As I stood up, I heard the footsteps again, this time sounding more like running just outside the bedroom door. I opened the door quickly, but the hallway was empty. Trying to stay calm for the kids' sake, I turned on every light in the house and checked all the doors and windows to make sure everything was secure. I didn't want to panic them, so I brushed it off as my imagination and returned to their room. But as I walked back, I felt a cold breath behind me, like someone was standing right there. I spun around, but again, no one was there. The hallway suddenly felt colder than usual, which was odd because it was August in Kansas. I checked the thermostat. It was set to a steady 75 degrees Fahrenheit, but the temperature in the house had dropped to 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Surprised, I adjusted the settings and waited for it to warm up. When I went back to the kids, one of them noticed I looked tense and asked if I was okay. I didn't want to worry them, so I made them sing and dance a bit to lighten the mood. They wore themselves out, and by 10:15 p.m., they were fast asleep. With about 45 minutes left until Mrs. Beckerman got home, I decided to watch some TV to distract myself. But as soon as I sat on the couch, I felt like someone was sitting right next to me. I glanced to my right, but of course no one was there. The feeling wouldn't go away, though. Suddenly, the reclining chair in the corner of the room began to shake, as if someone had touched it. I looked over and saw a small, shadowy figure dart past the chair. It looked like a dwarf-sized shadow, moving quickly out of sight. I tried to convince myself it was just a tree shadow since there were trees outside and lights on inside. Just as I turned back to the TV, a loud bang came from the kids' room, followed by one of the twins crying. I rushed in and found him on the floor. He told me that the old man had pushed him off the bed. I was shocked and tried to reassure him, saying there was no one else in the apartment. But then he showed me his leg, and I could clearly see the outline of a handprint. It was too large to be his twin's hand or even a child's. It was the size of an adult's hand, like mine. I was shaken but didn't want to leave the kids alone. I locked their bedroom door and stayed with them, comforting the boy until he calmed down and went back to sleep. But then I started hearing the footsteps again, stopping just outside the door. Gathering my courage, I shouted, asking whoever or whatever it was to leave us alone. The footsteps stopped, but the silence that followed was unsettling. After a few minutes, I opened the door and saw that same shadowy figure from earlier, standing still against the hallway wall. I watched, frozen, as it slowly moved down the hallway and disappeared. I knew now that it wasn't a tree shadow. There were no windows in the hallway, and the only light was from the hallway fixture. Panicking, I called Mrs. Beckerman and told her everything. She said she would be home in less than a minute. As soon as she arrived, I told her what had happened, and she rushed to check on her son. She knelt by his bed, visibly shaken, and started to cry. She then admitted that this wasn't the first time she'd experienced something like this. Up until now, the entity had never harmed her or the kids, but now that it had, she was very worried. I called my mom, who has experience with tarot and some knowledge of the spirit world, and asked her to come over right away. As soon as she stepped inside, she immediately fixed her gaze on the hallway. Without us even saying a word, she seemed to sense something. She didn't take her eyes off the hallway as she asked a few questions, which unnerved me even more. Finally, she told Mrs. Beckerman to bring the kids and stay with us for the night. The next morning, my mom and Mrs. Beckerman invited a priest to bless the apartment. After that, the Beckermans stayed there for a couple more years until they eventually moved to Texas due to Mrs. Beckerman's job transfer. Years later, when I was reminiscing with my mom about my teenage years, I asked her why she had reacted so strongly that night. She explained that when she entered the apartment, she'd seen a hunched man standing in the hallway, staring at us. She felt an intense, negative energy and knew it wasn't safe to stay there until the entity was dealt with. I was speechless and then joked that I'd survived 2 hours of hide and seek with the old man that night. But those 2 hours are something I'll never forget. Growing up, I lived with my mom and 2 brothers in a mobile home on a piece of land owned by my grandfather, located near the outskirts of our small town. The land was used for his businesses. He had a large gravel parking lot in front of our lawn, where trucks loaded and unloaded goods at his warehouse. On the left was his car wash, closer to the highway. It wasn't a picture-perfect family home, but it was good enough for us. My mom worked hard as a single parent, juggling work and the occasional painful attempt at dating, which left my brothers and me with a lot of alone time. We learned how to take care of ourselves early on and, being decent kids, stayed out of trouble. But for about 8 months, something strange and unsettling entered our lives, and the house became anything but normal. It began with me hearing my name called. Often, it sounded like my own voice urgently whispering my name. Once, though, I was outside when I heard my mother shriek my name from inside the house. Certain something horrible had happened. I ran in, only to find her calmly doing dishes. She was fine and denied calling me. A few weeks later, she did have an accident, breaking a glass and cutting her hand badly enough to need stitches. I couldn't help but wonder if it was connected. The whispering continued, and then something new started happening. Around 3:15 or 3:20 every morning, I'd snap wide awake, an overwhelming sense of fear washing over me. Nothing would happen, though, so I'd eventually drift back to sleep. One night, I woke up as usual and looked toward my bedroom window. By the streetlight's glow, I could see a silhouette. A man's head with a beard and glasses, leaning close to the glass, tilting his head as though peering in. I heard a faint tap, tap, tap as his fingernail tapped the window pane. At first, I was frozen with fear, but I soon panicked, violently shaking my older brother Mike awake and babbling about someone trying to break in. By the time he was awake enough to look, the man was gone. This happened a few times, and each time Mike found nothing, quickly losing patience with what he saw as my wild imagination. But I knew what I'd seen, even if no one else did. After the Shadow Man visits stopped, new, unexplainable sounds started. We'd hear something heavy moving across the roof 2 or 3 times a week. It would pace back and forth slowly, then pick up speed, growing louder before stopping abruptly, followed by loud knocks from random spots on the ceiling. Despite all our attempts to investigate, we never found any explanation. Whenever we went outside, the noises would immediately stop. It wasn't possible for an animal big enough to make that much noise to get up there, and no human could have moved as fast as the sounds suggested. Another strange incident happened while we were all out. My grandmother called to talk to my mom, but someone else answered. She assumed it was a friend of my younger brother Chris. When she asked why he was there alone, he replied, "I'm supposed to be here," and then hung up. We were never able to find out who had answered, and my brother's friends denied ever being in our home alone. Mike soon entered that too cool for you phase and started hanging out less with Chris and me. One night, he was out with friends while I stayed in, headphones on, watching my favorite team, the Raiders, play. I turned off the lights, the TV volume was down, and I was jamming to a Kiss album at full volume. Mike came in briefly, motioning for me to take off my headphones. He told me to turn off the light in Mom's room, then left. Not about to follow his orders, I ignored him. The light was on in Mom's room. I could see it glowing under her closed door at the end of the hallway. But I kept watching the game, hoping they'd pull off a win. When Mike came home for the night, we started talking, and he thanked me for turning off the light. I told him I hadn't, and we both looked down the dark hallway. The glow from under the door was gone. The light was off. We searched the entire trailer, weapons in hand, mine being a surprisingly real, sharp saber I'd somehow bought as a kid. The light switch was in the off position, and the bulb was working fine. Another time, Mike and I returned home after a little league game to find the house unexpectedly lit up. Every light was on, the TV and radio blared, faucets in the kitchen and bathroom ran at full blast, and both phones were off the hook. We shut everything off, calling out for anyone who might have been there. But the house was empty. Too freaked out to stay inside, we went to the car wash, sitting there in the dark, wondering what to do. Suddenly, every light in the house blinked on 3 or 4 times before staying on. The TV and radio started up again, slowly building in volume. That was it. We both ran to our aunt's house nearby and stayed there until my mom picked us up after work. One morning, as I was getting ready for school with Chris, I turned off all the lights. But as I looked down the hallway, I saw a hazy figure standing in Mom's bedroom doorway. It was barely distinct, like a human-shaped shadow, but unmistakable. Chris was by the front door, oblivious, while I stood frozen, hand on the switch. I turned off the hallway light, and the figure immediately floated from the doorway and down the hall toward me. It stopped at the edge of the kitchen, hovering a few inches above the floor. My heart was pounding as Chris noticed it too, both of us staring in silence. The thing and I were about 15 feet apart, but I reached out, turned off the kitchen light, and sprinted for the door without waiting to see what it would do. Chris was already outside. Just as I was about to shut the door, I saw the figure move into the living room. I flicked off the last light switch, and as it rushed toward me, I slammed the door shut. Neither of us could focus in school that day, and like everything else that had happened, we had no explanation. Eventually, the strange occurrences faded, and things went back to normal, or as normal as they could be. As far as I know, the warehouse and car wash are still there, but the trailer is long gone, torn down by the people who bought it from us years ago. When I was 17, I lived in rural Kansas, close to a Civil War battlefield. Throughout my childhood, I had frequent nightmares and eerie visits, often centered on a recurring dream of drowning in a river. But one night, things took a terrifying turn. I was having an especially disturbing nightmare. In it, I saw myself dead, lying in a bathtub filled with bloody water. I could smell decay, and a deep fear washed over me. It felt real, too real. Then I was gently shaken awake. I sat up, relieved to be alive, but when I looked around, no one was there. I dismissed it as a dream and drifted back to sleep. Soon, the nightmare resumed, this time showing my body in the bathtub in my grandparents' bathroom. They lived just down the road. Once again, I was shaken awake, feeling the same strange urgency. But once more, no one was there. Though the sensation of being shaken awake felt vivid, I brushed it off as exhaustion. I fell asleep again, only to find myself back in the nightmare. This time, I saw myself lying in my ex-boyfriend's bathroom, surrounded by demons. I felt a surge of fear and, within the dream, ran to his bedroom upstairs, seeking comfort. But the room was empty. I noticed, however, that he had rearranged things. His room was tidy, and his drawing board was now set up with notebook paper fastened by safety pins. For the third time, I was shaken awake, this time with even more urgency. When I opened my eyes, a glowing young man hovered about 2 feet above me, parallel to my body. He was faint, fading around his torso, but his features were well-defined. He looked at me intensely, his mouth moving as if trying to communicate something urgent from beyond the grave. Frozen with fear, my heart pounded in my chest. After what felt like a long minute, I broke free from my paralyzed state, rolled off the bed, and bolted to my mother's room. I breathlessly told her what had happened, but she just mumbled, "Amy, go back to bed." I refused to go back to my room that night, instead opting to sleep in my 6-year-old brother's room. But the story didn't end there. The next day, I had play practice at school. During a break, a girl from the cast burst into the bathroom, shouting, "I saw a ghost! I saw a ghost!" She said she'd seen a young man's apparition down the hallway from the theater. I felt my face go pale. I hadn't told anyone about my experience the night before. During lunch, I rushed to the payphone to call my ex-boyfriend, needing reassurance that he was still alive. We hadn't spoken or seen each other in 2 weeks, but I couldn't shake the fear that maybe he'd died. The ghostly figure I'd seen had resembled him, though I hadn't connected it until then. I fed a quarter into the phone and dialed his number. Relief washed over me when he answered. He was very much alive. I told him everything. The disturbing dream, the ghostly presence, even the vision of his room with the details of his rearranged drawing board. He listened in silence, and when I finished, he confirmed that he'd recently tidied his room and moved his drawing board to the spot I'd described. The only detail I'd gotten wrong was the paper. He had drawing paper on the board with paper clips in the corners, not notebook paper and safety pins, as I'd seen. Now, in my 30s, I still have unsettling dreams and occasional eerie experiences, though I haven't physically seen an apparition since I was about 19. I'm left to wonder who the ghostly figure was that visited me that night. My theory is that it could have been a Civil War spirit watching over the area, or perhaps an apparition that followed me from one of the cemeteries I often visited. The mystery lingers, but I'll always remember that intense, otherworldly presence hovering above me that night. When I was 15, my mom remarried, and we moved to a small town. Adjusting was hard. New town, new school, new friends, and to top it off, a new house. We moved into a 2-story brick house at 411 Clark Street in the middle of December 1983. I was actually excited at first, finally getting my own bedroom in a spacious house with 4 bedrooms, a large living room, kitchen, and 1.5 baths, plus a basement. I picked the center bedroom upstairs, between my sister's room on the right and my parents' room on the left. My brother had a room downstairs. The house was old, with a particular chill to it. One closet at the south end of the living room was especially cold, bone-chilling cold, and it stayed that way all year round. Even decades later, I can still feel the icy sensation from that closet. My room upstairs was pretty plain. Tan-paneled walls, a single window, and a closet that connected to my sister's room. It wasn't anything special, but it was mine. One Friday night in the summer of 1984, I decided to stay home. I was lying in bed, dozing off to the glow of my black and white TV while Sister Christian by Night Ranger played on MTV. I remember this night so clearly because my mom was always telling me, "Quit sleeping all the time. Go out and do something." I was suddenly jolted awake for no apparent reason. When I opened my eyes, I was immediately overwhelmed by a sense of dread. I couldn't breathe or move. Above my bed loomed a massive, dark, shadowy figure. Darker than any darkness I'd ever seen. The air in the room felt like it had been sucked into a vacuum. I was gasping, desperately trying to catch my breath, and my body felt strapped down to the bed. In sheer panic, I forced myself to sit up and turn to the edge of the bed, feeling an intense nausea. Then, without warning, I began to vomit something red, vivid, startling red. The strange thing was, I hadn't eaten or drunk anything that could explain the color. I was screaming by this point, and my mom burst into the room, freaking out, trying to figure out what was happening. I tried to explain what I had seen and felt, but she didn't believe me. She thought I had snuck out to go drinking with friends, despite my insistence that I hadn't left the house. My sister, who had been out that night, vouched for me, but the whole experience was beyond anything I could explain. The next day, I moved out of that room and into the downstairs bedroom. I never slept in that room again, nor did I even step inside it. I graduated in 1986 and left the house behind. But the strange events didn't stop with me. Other unsettling occurrences continued to happen in that house until I moved out, And even years later, people in town, many of whom weren't even born when I lived there, still share eerie stories about it. After years away, I returned to the area, and now my local beauty salon is next door to the house. Every time I go for a haircut, I find myself looking up at that bedroom window, memories of that night still fresh. My beautician recently told me something disturbing. She explained that, when the town was first established, there was a cemetery right where the house stands now. All the graves were supposedly moved out of town as the area was developed. My old house and her salon sit right on top of that former cemetery. It makes me wonder if that shadowy figure, and all the strange experiences we had in that house, were connected to something long buried beneath it. My story began when I was just 4 years old. One night I woke up, went to the bathroom, and then returned to bed. As I lay there, I became aware of a presence in the hallway just outside my door. Being only 4 and terrified, I pulled the covers over my head and told the presence to go away. I can't recall if I actually heard a voice or simply sensed it, but I distinctly remember the being communicating that it would go, but it would return. For years passed without any other experiences, until one night, the same thing happened again. I woke up, sensed the same presence outside my room, and, just like before, hid under my covers, asking it to leave. Once again, it seemed to respond in the same way, saying it would go but would return. I was certain I was awake, and the encounter felt eerily real. In my early teens, I became involved with a group called the Inner Peace Movement. Locally, it was a community group that met every Friday night in a private residence to hold spiritual development sessions. There was also a youth group, mostly the children of the adult attendees, that held their meetings in the basement. The group's basic tenets revolved around the idea that everyone has extrasensory gifts that can be developed with practice, and by exploring one's connection with the spiritual realm beyond normal perception. Helen M., a sensitive who hosted the meetings, would give readings. One evening, she sat me down in a comfortable chair, gave me some literature to read, and then went into a trance across from me. After about 20 minutes, she came out of it, and we discussed her assessment, which she'd written out on a pre-printed form. I still have those notes to this day. One page detailed the different types of perception: prophetic, feeling, intuitive, and visionary, along with how I used these abilities in daily life. Another page showed a diagram indicating the number of guardian angels I had. According to Helen, these were people who had evolved through many reincarnations and chosen to stay in the spiritual realm as guardians. I had 5 guardians, each from a unique past life: a Roman charioteer, a Roman senator, a forest woman skilled with herbs who lived among animals, a privateer or pirate, and a British mathematician. Then Helen dropped a bombshell. She said, "You have another spirit attached to you, someone who's caught between realms. Do you have a male relative who died in a fire or explosion?" My heart skipped a beat. My grandfather, Clyde Riedenbaugh, had died long before I was born in a tragic explosion at the Kansas Power and Light Plant in Topeka. Although he'd managed to escape during the initial evacuation, he went back into the plant to rescue someone left behind and was killed when the plant was destroyed in a gas explosion. I had never met him, but he had been married to my favorite grandmother, and I'd always been curious about him. Helen explained that people who die suddenly or violently may not realize they've passed on. They can become bound to the place where they died or drawn into the lives of their surviving loved ones. We planned a simple ceremony to contact Clyde's spirit, to thank him for watching over me, and to give him permission to cross over to the light. Afterward, I never felt his presence again, but that experience gave me personal proof of an afterlife. To this day, I believe that when my time comes, he'll be there with my other loved ones, waiting to welcome me in the light. I spent the first 18 years of my life in a small Kansas town, a peaceful place with fond memories of exploring the woods and rivers. While many strange things happened in and around that town, one incident stands out: the Burns Ranch. The Burns Ranch lay about 5 miles west of town, nestled at the base of a gently sloping hill, seemingly isolated from the world. A winding gravel road was the only way to reach it, eventually narrowing into ruts that disappeared into miles of empty pastureland. The house itself was a beautifully remodeled two-story Victorian built in the early 1900s. Behind it was a smaller guest house, and an old barn completed the layout. The land had been in the Burns family for generations, passed down until Richard Burns inherited it. At the time, Mr. and Mrs. Burns had a newborn baby girl and a son, Robert, who was a few years younger than me. In high school, I was a family friend and occasionally house-sat while they traveled. I always jumped at the chance for a few weeks of solitude at the ranch, even though the house had an undeniably eerie presence. One summer, the Burns family asked me to stay at the ranch for 2 weeks. The first week I'd be alone, but Robert would join me during the second week. I didn't mind since we got along well enough. I set out in the late afternoon, just as the shadows were beginning to stretch long over the gravel road. As I drove the winding curves, crossed low water bridges, and entered the prairie land, I finally saw the house up ahead. Despite having been there before, I could never quite shake the creepy feeling I'd get when the house came into view. It looked haunted. As I approached, I noticed someone standing in the upstairs rotunda window, Robert's room, holding the curtain back and watching me. When I pulled into the driveway, the curtain fell back into place, swaying slightly. Figuring someone must already be there, I parked, grabbed my bags, and headed to the back door. No one ever used the front door except to watch the sunset. When no one answered my knock, I assumed they'd left and grabbed the spare key hidden near the storm shelter built into the hillside. As I entered the foyer, I kept calling out to make my presence known, but silence greeted me. Confused but used to the house's strange vibes, I decided to check the whole place just to be sure. After searching every room, including the basement, I confirmed I was alone. I set up my guitar and amp in the entertainment room, planning to work on some music, and stocked the basement with movies I'd brought. The only responsibilities I had were answering the phone, if needed, and feeding the dog kept in a pen near the shelter. The first night passed without incident, but the following evening Mr. Burns called, asking how much rain we'd had. When I told him it hadn't rained at all, he asked me to check his rain gauge near the mailbox. Oddly, there was a 1/4 inch of water in it, despite the dry weather. When I reported back, he wasn't surprised and told me to lock the doors and not to let anyone in after dark. His words struck me as strange, but I shrugged it off and agreed. That night, a heavy storm rolled in, and the phone began ringing every hour. Each time I answered, there was only silence. Around midnight, I noticed lights flickering in the forest down by the low-water bridge. Concerned, I suited up in a raincoat, hung the key back up, and trudged through the rain toward the lights. But by the time I reached the bridge, I found nothing. No vehicle, no tracks, just the flooded road and pouring rain. Puzzled and more than a little unnerved, I returned to the house. Later, as I warmed up in the kitchen, I heard a car horn blaring. Looking out, I saw lights moving up the road toward the ranch, honking intermittently. Braving the rain again, I grabbed a rifle and stepped outside, watching as the lights grew brighter. But as I reached the edge of the driveway, everything suddenly stopped. No car, no lights, no sound. Shaken, I hurried back inside, deciding that was enough investigating for the night. At 4 a.m., I was startled awake by someone banging on the front door, the one no one ever used. I rushed down, dreading what I might find, but again, no one was there. I stayed up until dawn, too unsettled to sleep. The following morning, while returning the key to the storm shelter, I felt a strange pull to explore it. Ignoring the urge, I quickly placed the key behind the painting and shut the door, feeling relieved to be out in the open air. That day, I hiked up the hill behind the house, getting a wide view of the ranch. Everything seemed peaceful in the daylight, though the unease lingered. On my walk back, I noticed the barn door standing wide open. I checked inside, closed it, and propped a heavy rock against it. That evening, I practiced guitar in the entertainment room but kept feeling like someone was standing right behind me. Whenever I'd tell it to stop, the feeling would vanish, only to return when I resumed playing. A day or so later, Robert arrived with his grandmother. We spent the days hiking, talking, and sharing stories about the ranch. One evening, he asked how my week alone had gone, so I told him about the strange occurrences. He wasn't surprised. Robert shared his own experiences, like feeling drawn to the storm shelter only to have the heavy door slam shut, locking him inside. He also mentioned a lady he'd seen on the spiral staircase, someone he didn't recognize who glared at him before disappearing. He admitted he didn't use the library much, as he had recurring dreams about the room, especially the closet, which he later learned had been where a relative was born and died. One night, as we watched movies in the basement, we heard the old-fashioned toilet in the nearby bathroom flushing on its own. We turned off the water, but later, around 1 or 2 a.m., we heard the back door slam. Suddenly alert, we grabbed our rifles and listened as slow, deliberate footsteps crossed the foyer above us and came toward the basement door. The door creaked open, and we could hear footsteps descending the staircase. Just as they reached the third-to-last step, we held our breath, but no one appeared. Gathering courage, we peeked around the wall. No one was there, and the door was shut. After checking every door and window, we stayed up the rest of the night in the dining room, too shaken to sleep. Robert left the next day, and I called a friend to spend my last night there. Even he mentioned how unsettling the house felt, and he left early the next morning. Before leaving, I returned the key to the shelter, hesitating only briefly. I noticed the barn door open again with the heavy rock gone, and made a final walkthrough of the house before locking up. When I asked Mr. Burns later how he'd known it would rain, he looked puzzled and swore he hadn't called me at all during that trip. The Burns Ranch remains one of the most unsettling places I've ever stayed. While I don't know what to make of all the strange events, it was just one of many mysteries in the small Kansas town where I grew up. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Selling real estate is an adventure in itself. Buyers and sellers often come with surprises, but sometimes it's the homes that hold the biggest ones. In April 1989, I was a skeptic. I didn't believe in ghosts. It wasn't logical. But that spring, my beliefs would be put to the test. I listed a stunning 200-year-old Italianate mansion set on 6 acres. The house was halfway through renovations, and as the owner showed me around, I admired the grand entryway flanked by twin parlors. The left parlor was a comfortable living room, while the right served as a music room, featuring a beautiful antique grand piano. From the formal dining room, we moved into a newly remodeled kitchen and bath, which completed the first floor tour. Then, we ascended the wide, curving staircase leading to the tower on the 3rd floor, a single room surrounded by windows offering breathtaking views of the entire farm and surrounding countryside. On the 2nd floor, 5 of the 6 bedrooms were in various stages of renovation except for one. Painted a warm yellow with white trim, this room was untouched. The owner explained that attempts to repaint it had failed. Any new color would fade overnight, revealing the yellow walls by morning. She mentioned it had been the bedroom of a young son from the late 1800s, who she said was one of the ghosts in the house. A calm presence lingered in the room, but you couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching you. I felt an odd chill and wanted to leave, but I didn't believe in ghosts. The owner mentioned sightings of a young boy, a man, and 2 men. Workers had reported vanishing tools, sounds of heavy objects being dragged, and footsteps from the empty floors above. I smiled politely, unconvinced. The open house 2 weeks later fell on a sunny, brisk 60-degree day. The mansion gleamed with tools stored away, and the kitchen was set up with homemade donuts, mint iced tea, and coffee for visitors as they waited to be guided on a tour. Each tour ended with the agent escorting the visitor out the front door. Toward the end of the 3-hour event, I was showing a visitor out when I felt an unexpected chill in the air. As I turned back toward the kitchen, I glanced at the music room. There, at the piano, sat a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a bun, dressed in a plain gray dress. Her large, dark eyes were downcast, focused on the keys without playing. Startled, I went to find the other agent. "Why is there someone wandering around without you?" I asked. "There's no one else here," she replied. "Well, maybe she came in through the front door," I said, trying to reason it out. "She's waiting in the music room." The owner overheard and asked, "What does she look like?" As I described her, the owner gave a knowing smile. "You just met Sally Ann." "Who's Sally Ann?" I asked, a prickle of unease creeping up my spine. "Our ghost," the owner replied. The next thing I knew, I woke up with a wet towel on my head and tissue stuffed in my nose. My friend told me I'd suddenly started shaking, had a nosebleed, and passed out. When I sat up, I asked how many lightning strikes we'd counted. He said we were up to 10. Then, right on cue, another flash of lightning struck. I told him I'd seen a man-like figure with glowing red eyes staring from the trailer. We waited in tense silence, counting as the lightning flashed 2 more times. With the 13th strike, the room went cold, and the TV turned off. My eyes were still adjusting to the darkness when I saw a small figure. A little girl. Heart pounding, I shut my eyes and covered my head, whispering, "Okay, I believe you, Rick." But he didn't respond. I opened my eyes to find her face inches from mine, staring right at me. I was sure my heart was about to stop. Later, we tried asking around about the house's history. Some locals confirmed it was haunted, saying things like, "No kidding." One woman who had once lived there shared her own terrifying experience. She said one night, after locking up the house, she was drifting off to sleep when she heard the front door unlock, open, close, and lock again. Since only the side door could be locked from the outside, she was sure someone was in the house. Rushing downstairs, she found no one. She went back to bed, only to hear her dishes rattling in the kitchen. Hurrying down again, she saw dishes scattered on the floor, with knives and forks hovering in midair. Then they suddenly flew toward her, forcing her to take cover behind a door. She left the house that very night and moved out the next day. Something dark and terrible must have happened in that house. We've tried researching its history, but nothing shows up online or in the local archives. We're convinced someone might have covered it up to sell the property. When my family, my parents, sister, and I moved into a house in Waco, Kentucky, strange things started happening almost immediately. My 2 nieces lived right across from us, so we'd often spend time together. One night, I was on the computer while my sister and nieces were hanging out in our shared room. My bed was on one side, and my sister's bed was on the other. Suddenly, I heard my name being called. When I opened the door, I saw my sister and nieces pointing at my bed with wide eyes. When I looked over, I saw the front of my bed sunken in, as if someone invisible was sitting on it. They told me they had seen a young Native American girl holding a doll sitting right there. Waco was once Native American land, so that was unsettling. I quickly told whatever it was to leave and went with my sister and nieces to the living room. My mother brushed it off, saying it was just the pillow creating a dent. But this wasn't just a small indent. It looked like the whole side of the bed had dipped down. There were other strange things, too. My uncle had passed away in that same room from a heart attack, and my sister swore she would sometimes see a figure looking down at her while she lay in bed. She told me she once had a strong feeling to say his name. When she did, the figure bent down and stretched out a hand, as if he was trying to touch her. Sometimes, when the lights were off in my mother's room, the whole space felt wrong, filled with an oppressive, heavy feeling. One night, my bed was positioned so I could see into the living room. From the kitchen to my mom's room, there was a narrow hallway with the washer and dryer. As I lay there, I saw a young girl standing in the hallway, hunched over like she was crying. After that, the whole house felt off like we were being watched all the time. One night, my sister was sleeping on the couch, facing the wall. She said she felt breathing on her ear and neck. When she turned, she saw a small black dog sitting beside her. She watched it silently bark, although she couldn't hear anything. Then, it ran into the kitchen and disappeared. The next morning, she drew a sketch of the dog exactly how she'd seen it. Another night, my sister was lying in bed listening to her CD player. Just as she was drifting off, she took off her headphones and laid them beside her. Later, she heard the sound of the headphone cord being pulled up and down, making that distinctive rustling noise. After we'd been living there for 2 or 3 years, My granny came to stay in my room one night. I was in my bed while my sister slept on the couch in the living room. Every time I woke up that night, my door was open a little wider. I must have woken up 6 or 7 times, and by the last time, the door was fully open. Strange things continued happening. Once, I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. As I opened the door, it felt like someone was on the other side, pulling it open with me. It actually tugged me forward. My niece experienced the same thing another night. Curious, I decided to set a recorder at the end of my bed where the little girl had supposedly sat. When we came back to check it, the recorder had shut itself off for no apparent reason. In my mother's room, she kept a collection of dolls on a shelf above her bed. One night, my niece and I were lying on her bed watching TV when one of the dolls, a cowboy, fell off the shelf. It landed facing us, staring right at us. The doll is still in that spot. We never dared to touch it. I felt my hair stand on end, goosebumps covering my arms. I hurried back to the music room. Empty. I checked the living room and then, racing up the stairs, the bedrooms. No one. The last place to check was the tower. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time and pushed open the creaking door. The room was empty. She was gone, vanished without a trace. Back in the kitchen, my hands trembled as I reached for the strong cup of coffee the owner handed me. She told me Sally Ann's story. Sally Ann, her husband, his brother, and their young son were the original owners. Sally Ann had an affair with her husband's brother. When her husband found out, the 2 men dueled in the upstairs hallway. Both died from their injuries, and Sally Ann's son died a year later of typhoid. She herself died at 30, said to have passed from a broken heart. Sally Ann only shows herself to those she approves of as guests in her home. Her son is sometimes with her. The 2 brothers are likely the ones causing the tools to disappear, still having their fun. She smiled. Sally Ann is kind. She's just part of the family now. Well, great, I thought. Sally Ann likes me, but I don't believe in ghosts. The owner went on to explain that she'd hired a seer, who identified each spirit. The family, all buried at Lexington Cemetery, had been researched by the seer, who had even suggested searching for Sally Ann's wedding ring with a metal detector near the 5th fence post outside the house. When she followed his instructions, she found the ring, initials and all, buried 2 feet down. She opened a drawer and took out the small band, engraved with delicate initials. I shivered, struggling to hold onto my skepticism. It was just a ring. With the open house over, I finished my coffee and prepared to leave. As I approached the front door, a cold breeze swept over me, and I felt a prickling at the back of my neck. I turned slowly. There, standing at the top of the stairs, was Sally and, smiling softly. The owner had told me where the family was buried, so a few days later, curiosity got the better of me and I paid a visit. There, in Lexington Cemetery, I found them all just as she'd described. I couldn't resist stopping by the archives to verify the seer's stories, and they checked out every detail. There was even a photograph of Sally and herself. After all these years, I believe. There's a house in my hometown that holds memories of unexplainable, unsettling events. My best friend and I both lived there at different times, and we witnessed many of the same eerie things, sometimes separately, sometimes together. The first strange thing I saw happened one morning while I was getting ready for school. I was headed downstairs, wrapped in a sheet because the house always stayed cold. As I reached the stairs, I felt something behind me. Turning, I saw a dog. But this was no ordinary dog. I could see through it, and it had no head. I froze, terrified, before dashing downstairs. Another time, I went to the basement where we kept our pool table. I turned on the basement light and began heading down the stairs. Halfway down, something cold and firm grabbed my leg from behind the steps. Panicking, I sprinted down the rest of the stairs, only for the light to go out suddenly. I bolted up the steps and out the side door. After that, we moved the pool table upstairs. There was also a small, strange wooden box in my parents' room that I could never get open. It looked like an old storage box, but it had a presence that felt off. Years later, after my family moved out, my best friend and his family moved into the same house. I had nearly forgotten about my own unsettling experiences there until he started telling me about things he'd been seeing. He said on certain nights, he could see and hear a red ball bouncing down the stairs, only for it to bounce back up again. He also saw a little girl who would appear in his room, crying over her doll, which had a missing head. But there was more. He saw a man appear with an axe, who would grab the girl, drag her out of the room, and throw her down the stairs. One night, he worked up enough courage to follow them. He watched them head to the basement, where they vanished. The basement seemed to transform before his eyes. The floor was covered with bones, and a strange light glowed in the corner. He crawled into a tunnel that wrapped around half of the house, finding an axe propped up against the wall. When he reached for it, the axe disappeared. One summer, I stayed over for the night, something we did often. It was around 4 p.m., and we were watching old tapes of ECW wrestling. Out of nowhere, it got disturbingly dark outside, darker than it should have been for that hour, and lightning started flashing. My friend mentioned that the last time this happened, the ghost had appeared after the lightning flashed 13 times. I laughed it off, but then, flash, lightning struck once, then twice. I glanced out the window and saw something odd. The abandoned trailer across the street looked like it had a figure staring out at us. There was one especially strange incident involving my sister and my 2 nieces in my mom's room. My older niece suddenly froze, and her arms crossed tightly over her chest. But her hands weren't holding her arms. It was like something else was forcing them to stay in place. My sister tried to pull her arms apart, but they wouldn't budge, as if some unseen force was holding them. Everyone in the house has seen strange figures, faces, and shadows. We've all heard things too, things that can't be explained. I still live in this house today, and even now it feels like we're not alone. During my rebellious teenage years, I decided to buy a Ouija board along with some other paranormal items, all behind my parents' backs. I was fascinated by the supernatural, even if I'd never actually used the board. It was more a symbol of mystery to me, untouched for 3 years since I bought it. One night during high school, I was invited to a party hosted by a friend who practiced witchcraft. She had a supportive family who respected her choices, so they didn't mind me bringing my Ouija board. Unbeknownst to me, my friend had previously destroyed her own board due to terrifying experiences, something I didn't learn until later. Around 1 or 2 a.m., my friend gathered 5 of her coven members along with me. She carefully explained the importance of staying calm and maintaining the protection circle they'd perform before we began. They used salt to create a ring around us and lit several candles. They also said a safe word, Lucy, in case anyone felt uneasy and wanted to stop, a word we could use to prevent angering any spirits present. The air was thick with tension as the group chanted a verse several times. Then, my friend handed me a notebook and pen to record the board's responses. I wasn't touching the board. I was simply observing and recording. They began with simple questions. Is there anyone with good intentions who would like to speak with us? Or, is there a spirit who would like to communicate? Nothing happened at first, and it felt like a letdown, but they stayed patient. Just as they were about to end the session, the planchette moved, spelling out hello. Startled, we greeted the spirit back, and my friend asked, "What would you like us to call you?" Slowly, it spelled, Richard. After a few back-and-forth questions, Richard explained he was once human. When asked how he died, he simply responded, accident, and then repeatedly spelled out, no, when pressed for details. 3 of the girls, clearly disturbed, wanted to stop, but my friend insisted we continue. Then, something unexpected happened. The board spelled, not Richard. What do you mean? One of the girls asked, her voice wavering. This is me, it spelled. Richard left. You are mean. He was sad. Trying to calm the board, my friend gently asked, if you're not Richard, who are you? After a moment's pause, it spelled, Nicole. The atmosphere grew even colder. With curiosity mixed with fear, my friend asked, Nicole, how old are you? 7, she responded. One of the girls tried to relate, mentioning she had a younger brother around the same age. The board reacted swiftly, spelling, boys are mean and icky, especially Bastien. "Who is Bastien?" someone asked. "My brother," the board spelled, slowly this time. The conversation grew unsettling as Nicole began mentioning how Bastien lies and Bastien is naughty, repeating naughty several times with increasing speed and urgency. The room had grown tense, and we all exchanged wary glances. The planchette began to spell naughty again and again, faster and faster. Terrified, I blurted out Lucy, the safe word. My friend hesitated but eventually moved the planchette to goodbye with a surprising amount of resistance. Once the session was over, the girls hurriedly performed a quick closing chant for protection. As we left the circle, one of the coven members complained that she felt her hair tugged and a cold pressure on her foot, claiming it was a sign of lingering energy. We were all shaken by the events, but my friend wasn't ready to let it go. She asked to keep the board, determined to try and reach out to Richard and Nicole again. Over the next few days, she reportedly tried several more times, but no responses came through. Eventually, her coven decided that the board had absorbed too much negative energy. They destroyed it, ending any further attempts at contact. To this day, I still get chills thinking about that night. It was an experience that left me with a deeper respect for the unknown and a reluctance to ever test those boundaries again. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Oh. My husband and I bought our current house nearly 6 years ago. At the time, we had 2 daughters, ages 4 and 2. The first time we walked in, I felt a strange sense of sadness and loneliness, as if the house had absorbed some kind of sorrow. I dismissed it, thinking I was just being sensitive. But as we spoke with the owner, she began sharing her life story, mentioning her husband's passing and her struggles with depression. I found it odd that I had sensed something similar when I walked in. We decided to buy the house, and soon after moving in, I noticed strange things. Occasionally, the children's toys would start playing music on their own in empty rooms. I brushed it off, blaming it on low batteries or random glitches. I didn't want to think it could be anything more, though I'd had such experiences before. After 2 years, I gave birth to our son. By then, my daughters were both in school during the day, so it was just me and my baby at home. One day, while he was napping in his swing in the living room, I was catching up on chores in the kitchen. As I walked through the door to check on him, I saw her, a little girl walking from the hallway into the living room. For a moment, I thought it was my daughter, but I realized this girl had darker hair and wore an old-fashioned nightgown, maybe with a teddy bear design on the front. She turned her face toward me, and I froze. She looked as solid and real as anyone, but her face seemed empty, especially her eyes. Then, she vanished. I was shaken, but my son was sound asleep. I told myself it was a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. I tried to ignore it for a few weeks, but then one night, while my husband was working his night shift, I was in the kitchen talking on the phone. As I stepped back from the sink to grab a towel, I felt like I had bumped into something. Light, but definitely there. When I turned, she was standing right behind me, so close I could barely breathe. I turned away and looked back, but she was gone, as if she had never been there. Since then, I've often heard a child's voice calling, "Mommy." When I check, my children are always fast asleep, and the voice doesn't sound like either of my daughters. As a mother, I know the sound of my children's voices anywhere. One morning, I heard a child humming and playing in the bathroom next to our bedroom. The sound was cheerful, as if she were playing with items on the counter. It didn't sound like my daughters, but I asked my husband to check. He found no one there, and our children were still asleep. There was no way one of them could have gone to the bathroom and back without us noticing. Eventually, I confided in my husband and my brother about the little girl. I was hesitant to tell anyone, but I felt I needed to share. They were skeptical, and they probably still are. After that, I didn't see her again. But something else appeared. I've only seen it twice. It's entirely black, without any transparency, and roughly the size and shape of the little girl. I've seen it darting quickly from the kitchen to the hallway, and once from the living room to the hallway. I can't explain it. Did the little girl get upset because I shared her story? I'm not sure, but it seems like the black figure only appeared after I talked about her. It feels like there's a connection, though I don't know what it means. This started when I was about 7 or 8, here in Kentucky, where I still live in the same house. When my family moved here from across town, I didn't mind it. I didn't have to change schools or anything. But soon after we moved in, odd things started happening. Occasionally, I'd hear my name called. It always sounded like my dad. I'd run upstairs, asking him what he wanted, but he'd always tell me he hadn't called me. At first, I thought he was just messing with me since he likes to joke around. But as I got older, it happened more and more, even when I was home alone. I eventually got used to it, still thinking my dad might be playing a trick on me. One weekend, I was downstairs watching TV with my dog while my dad was asleep upstairs. I heard my name called again. This time, I knew my dad was asleep, but I went upstairs anyway, checking the dark rooms. My dad was still sound asleep. I went back downstairs, feeling pretty creeped out. My dog didn't follow me back into the room. When I sat down to watch TV again, I had the feeling that someone was watching me. It was unsettling, so I turned off the TV and went out into the hallway, where my dog was waiting for me. This kept happening, and I became so scared that I wouldn't go near that hallway if the lights were off. Even with the lights on, I only felt safe if someone was with me. About a year later, when I was around 11, I thought I was old enough to stay home alone. But one night changed my mind. I was watching TV in the living room with the hallway to my right. I heard my name called from the hallway, just a faint whisper at first. A few minutes later, I heard it again, this time louder. I jumped up, looking into the dark hallway. I don't remember seeing anything, but I was so scared that I ran upstairs and turned on every light, TV, and computer I could. Soon after, I was playing hide and seek with my younger brother. He liked hiding in the closet in the room where I always felt watched. I thought I'd found him because I saw the clothes moving on the hangers. But when I pushed the clothes aside, he wasn't there. I kept searching, even though I heard soft laughter, but eventually, I gave up. I called out for him and he yelled back from the room down the hall. Terrified, I ran out of there, my heart racing. After that, things settled down, though I'd still hear my name every so often. I'd always feel nervous in dark areas of the house, running through any room that wasn't lit. A few months after I turned 12, I had another strange experience. I was doing something when I suddenly looked up and saw a figure standing there. He was a light blue, almost white, wearing clothes that looked like they were from 20 or 30 years ago, a nice suit with a feathered hat. We stared at each other for a few seconds, and then he vanished. After that, I was afraid to go anywhere downstairs alone. Surprisingly, I never heard my name called after that, but I would sometimes feel like someone was watching me or I'd walk through cold spots. I'm 16 now, and I can still feel him watching me, especially when I talk about him. I've told my friends, but they laugh about me being scared of a hallway. My mom doesn't believe me, and my brother doesn't want to believe in ghosts because of his faith. My dad is one of the few who believes me, though it's never happened to him. About a year ago, I started feeling his presence again, but differently. Now, he doesn't call my name but just seems to stand behind me, watching. A few months ago, my light started flickering on and off. I ignored it until it went on for about 10 minutes straight. I'd been reading about ghosts and talking about him with my dad and a few friends. Nervously, I unplugged the light, half expecting it to keep flickering, but thankfully, it stopped. Later, a friend with a similar experience encouraged me to try talking to him. One night, I sat in the hallway with the lights off, trying to clear my mind. I'm not used to meditating, so it was tough, but I began listening and asking questions. I thought I'd been there for only 5 minutes, but my friend, who was on the phone with me, said I'd been silent for 20. I don't remember what happened during that time, and after that night, I gave up trying to communicate, feeling like it was a lost cause. About a week later, I woke up early for school and went to shower. Suddenly, I heard him yell, "B-O-O!" Startled, I jumped, fully awake, and asked out loud, "Why did you scare me?" I didn't get a reply and haven't tried talking to him since, but I still feel him watching me at night. I don't think he's a bad spirit, but I'm scared to try communicating with him again. I haven't been able to find out anything about the history of this house or who he might be, so I'm left wondering who he could be and why he's here. My name is Brandon, I'm 20 years old, and I live in Georgetown, Kentucky. My girlfriend, Monica, and I have been together for 3 years. About a year ago, I woke up one night to her hitting me. I was confused and asked her what was going on. She was crying, looking terrified. After catching her breath, she explained that something had woken her by pressing down on her chest. She tried to call my name but couldn't speak or move. Finally, when she regained control, she hit me to wake me up. I held her and tried to comfort her, assuming it was just a bad dream. Then, about a month later, the exact same thing happened to me. Feeling pinned down, unable to speak or move. It left me shaken, though I didn't think much of it at the time. Fast forward a year. I'd accepted Jesus into my life, started studying the Bible deeply, and felt at peace. But recently, things changed again. I was staying at Monica's house, and around 6 p.m., I got a call from my mom saying my new keyboard had arrived. I told Monica I'd go pick it up, and she said she'd take a nap while I was gone. As I was leaving her room, I suddenly felt a strong sense of discomfort, like something was urging me not to leave. I couldn't explain it, but I brushed it off and went on my way. Yet, even as I drove home, the feeling lingered. Once I got home, though, my focus shifted to the keyboard, and the discomfort disappeared. Barely 20 minutes later, I got a call from Monica. She was crying and only managed to say, "It happened again, but worse." Immediately, I knew what she meant. I felt guilty for leaving her. I rushed back to her house and found her terrified, unable to speak from the shock. I grabbed my Bible, went inside, and managed to calm her down enough to tell me what had happened. She explained that she had woken up to the feeling of someone or something sitting on her bed. She thought it was me and called my name, Brandon, but there was no response. Then she called out, "God." But before she could finish, it stopped her, throwing her arms back and turning her head to the side, her eyes fixed on the wall. On the wall, she saw a vision of Jesus on the cross, blood dripping from his head. She tried to stop it by praying, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." But as soon as she got to Spirit, it stopped her. Then it grabbed her by the hair and dragged her closer to the closet. She attempted to say the prayer again, but it stopped her at Spirit each time, then forced her jaw down painfully. She tried once more, determined, and finally whatever it was began to leave, though she said it crept out of her body slowly. I was stunned. It sounded like something from a horror movie, but it was real. Trying to stay strong for her, I took her hand and led her back to her room. As soon as we entered, I felt an icy chill go through me. I glanced at the bed, where the encounter had happened, and saw a white handprint with long fingernails. The strange thing was that neither of us has long nails, and she'd taken the sheets to my house to wash them the day before. I freaked out, telling her we needed to leave immediately. We ran out of the house. Monica called her parents, I called mine, and she reached out to her grandfather, who is a preacher, for help. It all started when I was 10 years old, after my mother passed away from brain cancer. My father had canceled her life insurance policy about 5 years before she was diagnosed, as we were struggling financially. As a result, when Mom died, we lost our home and had to move in with my father's parents. At first, we wanted to keep going to our usual school, so my dad drove us 30 minutes each way, every morning and evening. But that soon became exhausting. To make things easier, my grandparents put their house up for sale and bought an old farmhouse closer to our school district. From the moment I saw that house, I hated it. The house was over 100 years old, small, and didn't have running water. It only had 2 bedrooms, so my grandparents took one, and my father, sister, and I shared the other. We called it the Charcher Place, after the family who originally built it. It was close to the 2-year anniversary of my mom's death when my grandparents bought the house. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed up a bit later. I wasn't exactly the most obedient kid, especially after Mom died. As I was sitting there, I heard a noise, like something falling in the walk-in closet. I got up to check it out, but everything seemed fine. I figured maybe my grandparents were making noise in their bedroom, which was on the other side of the closet wall, so I shrugged it off and went back to my room. That's when I saw her. A woman was kneeling beside my father's bed, her head resting on the bed next to his face, as if she were crying. I didn't recognize her at first, just a woman who shouldn't have been there. I stepped forward, and a floorboard creaked under my feet. She looked up toward the sound, and it felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Couldn't breathe. Standing 10 feet in front of me was my mother. She held her arms out to me, and my first instinct was to run into them. I started to move, but then stopped in my tracks. I don't know how I hadn't noticed it sooner, but her eyes were red, and her fingernails were long and sharp, almost like claws. As she moved closer, I realized her feet weren't even touching the ground. Panic filled me. I was terrified. I bolted, running past her and diving into my bed, pulling the covers over my head. But just as I was about to get there, I felt her claw scratch my ankle, and it hurt. I stayed hidden under the covers, peeking out after a minute. The room was empty. I must have fallen asleep somehow because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and my mama was singing her usual wake-up song from the kitchen. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But when I pulled back the covers, I saw a gash on my ankle, with dried blood around it. I realized that what I'd seen had been real. I try not to think about that night, but it's hard sometimes. Since then, I've never been able to have a good dream about my mother. And I know, without a doubt, that whatever that thing was, it wasn't her. My husband and I used to live in an apartment building that was over 100 years old. Over the years, the building had been used for different things. We moved in August of 2007, and a lady across the hall claimed she'd seen and heard things in the hallway and in her apartment. We thought she was just imagining things. At the time, my husband worked the night shift, so I was often alone at night. After a few weeks, I started hearing strange noises but figured it was just the cat or the old building settling. One night, though, I was lying in bed when I heard the bedroom door creak open. I sat up and called my husband's name, thinking he'd come home early, but there was no answer. I shut the door and went back to sleep. A few nights later, it happened again, but this time the door flew open, as if someone had angrily pushed it. I got up, looked around, but no one was there. I left the door open, thinking, oh well, it must be the building. As I lay back down, I heard my mom's voice right in my ear, softly saying my name. I looked around, but of course, no one was there. For months, this kept happening. Hearing voices I recognized, like my mom, my sister, or even my husband, saying my name as I was about to sleep. I tried to ignore it, but it happened every night, and the voices were so real. I finally told my husband, but he thought I was overreacting. It got to the point where I was staying up all night because I was too scared to sleep alone. About a year after we moved in, my husband was on vacation. I was out with friends, and he went to bed early since we were leaving for vacation the next morning. He locked the front door, turned off the lights, and closed the bedroom door. About 30 minutes later, the bedroom door flung open, and the living room light turned on. He thought I'd come home early, but when he got up to check, I wasn't there. He turned off the lights and went back to bed. Then, about 10 minutes later, he heard my voice yelling for help. I was supposedly in trouble, and he jumped out of bed to look for me, but I still wasn't home. Later, he told me he'd been hearing strange noises even during the day while trying to sleep, but he hadn't mentioned it because he knew how scared I was. After that, I decided to look into the history of the building. I found out that in the early 1900s, the building had been converted into a doctor's office, and the doctor performed surgeries in what was now our apartment. I also found out that if a ghost or spirit wants to contact you, they might use the voice of someone you know. I'm not sure what they were trying to tell us, but after 2 years of these strange experiences, we decided it was time to move. As far as I know, the landlord still struggles to keep that apartment rented. What you're about to read may be disturbing. This started 3 years ago, in the summer of 2006. I have no idea what triggered these events, but I'll tell you this story is real. In July, my mom began leaving the basement door open to let the cooler air circulate upstairs since it was so hot. One night, My dad dropped me off at my mom's house. As I walked in, I noticed the basement door was slightly open. My mom hugged me and went to her room. Curious, I looked downstairs, listening for any sounds. That's when I heard a low growl. It sounded like a large dog, but I somehow knew it wasn't a normal animal. Feeling uneasy, I quickly shut the door and turned off the light. I didn't mention it to my mom or brother, knowing they'd probably dismiss it as my imagination. Toward the end of July, I woke up in the middle of the night. My mom and brother were asleep, so I decided to check the basement again. All the lights in the house were off, and as I walked down the hallway, I saw the basement door was wide open this time. I stopped at the top of the stairs, peering down into the darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw something that's hard to describe. A huge, monstrous figure. It looked like it was made of smoke or gas, slightly transparent but almost invisible. It seemed deformed, with a twisted shape and countless tiny, glowing lights that I think were eyes. I could also make out what looked like a head or maybe several heads and large, claw-like hands. It was too dark to see it clearly, but it was there, and it was terrifying. The sight of this thing froze me in place. I felt a powerful, threatening presence, almost as if it was warning me not to come any closer. Too scared to even close the door, I backed away, feeling that if I shut the door, it might provoke whatever this thing was. I went to my mom's room and lay in bed beside her, still wide awake. Then I started hearing footsteps and a strange clinking sound, like armor or equipment, coming from downstairs. It was as if something was running, then stopping, running, then stopping, each time getting closer to the stairs. My mom and brother were fast asleep, but my heart was racing with fear. The closer the sounds got, the stronger the sense of threat grew. I felt helpless, knowing if I woke anyone up, they wouldn't believe me. The footsteps and clinking sounds continued for a while, maybe 5 or 6 times, and then stopped. Nothing else happened for the rest of the night. A few weeks later, my brother went off to college, and my mom and I moved to an apartment in another city. But before we moved out of that house, I started noticing terrible, rotten smells. They were by far the worst smells I'd ever encountered. Like feces, but far worse than anything I could recognize. Since then, I've tried not to think about that house, but the memory of those sounds, smells, and that horrible figure at the bottom of the stairs still haunts me. When my father left our family, my mom moved my brother, Chucky, and me to an old farmhouse, as far from town as we could afford. She had always depended on both incomes, so now she had to work a second job, traveling miles every day. When she got home, she'd only have time for a short nap before heading to her night shift as a nurse. Life was tough for her, so I never told her how scared I felt in our new house. I don't call it home because it never truly felt like ours. As I mentioned, Mom was gone a lot. My brother, Chucky, was put in charge, but at 16, the last thing he wanted was to look after his kid sister. He mostly locked himself in his room with his friends, doing who knows what, leaving me to entertain myself. 13, that wasn't hard to do. During the day, I played outside with my dog or climbed trees, but nighttime was different. Nighttime was when things felt off. The first strange experience happened one night when Mom wasn't home. It was just me and Chucky. He told me to go to bed, and I fell asleep quickly. But a few hours later, I woke up to the sound of someone softly laughing. I thought it might be Chucky, so I tiptoed out of my room, curious about what was so funny. But when I peeked into his room, I saw he was fast asleep, snoring loudly as always. I figured I must have imagined it and started heading back to my room. Just then, I heard a whisper, "Don't go in there." It wasn't a soft whisper, though. It was barely audible, but I could sense irritation, almost like a warning. My heart raced. Was someone in the house? Who said that? I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. There was no reply. I stood there at my bedroom doorway, hesitant to go in, but I figured I was just tired and imagining things. So, after a moment, I went back to bed, pulling the covers over my head. I told myself I was being silly, but as I started to drift off, I heard it again. Elizabeth. Someone said my full name. The voice had no clear tone, though maybe it sounded a bit concerned. I couldn't be sure. I threw off the covers and sat up, my heart pounding. Just as I sat up, I caught a glimpse of someone standing in my doorway. I blinked and they were gone. That was it. I'd had enough. I jumped out of bed and practically ran to Chucky's room, turning on every light along the way. "Chucky, please wake up," pleaded. He groaned, looking at me with irritation. "What's wrong, sis?" he yawned. I couldn't think of any reasonable explanation, so I went with the truth. "Either there's someone in this house, or it's haunted," I blurted out. He didn't look convinced, at least not until we both heard a loud banging noise coming from the living room. Chuck muttered something, jumped out of bed, and went for his hunting gear. He grabbed a shotgun, made sure it was loaded, and tossed me the cordless phone. "I want you to hide in my closet and call Dad if I yell. Okay?" he said. "Chucky, I don't think that—" I started, but he cut me off. "Just do it," he insisted. So, I hid in his closet while he turned off the lights and carefully started moving through the house with the gun. I knew he wouldn't find anything or anyone in the house. Whatever was making those noises wasn't something a gun could stop. The voice I'd heard was unfamiliar, and whoever or whatever it was had been invisible. I didn't call our dad, who was the chief of police at the time, because I knew no one could help us with something like this. Eventually, Chucky returned, looking completely puzzled. "I just don't get it. All the doors and windows are locked tight. There's no sign of anyone breaking in. So where did that noise come from?" he asked. "I don't know, but it started in my room," I explained, telling him about the laughter, the voice warning me not to go back in, and the figure I'd seen at my doorway. Chucky believed me, but we decided to keep it a secret. We didn't want to worry our mom or make her feel guilty for leaving us alone in the house. We both hoped it was just a one-time thing, some strange fluke. Looking back, I realized we were foolish to think it was over. Chucky and I had decided to keep what happened to ourselves, not wanting to worry Mom. We figured she wouldn't believe us, and she already had so much to deal with, juggling 2 jobs, bills, the stress of the divorce. We also thought maybe it was a one-time thing and hoped we wouldn't experience anything like that again. But we were very wrong. The second incident happened on another night when Mom was at work. It wasn't too late. The sun had just set, and I was still up watching TV, debating whether to make a snack and maybe do some homework. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. The strange events from before hadn't even crossed my mind, so I just assumed it was Chucky. But then, everything on the kitchen counter, glasses, plates, bowls, flew off and crashed to the floor. Chucky came running in, and I was standing in the kitchen doorway, completely shocked. The most unbelievable part was that none of the dishes had broken, even though I'd clearly heard shattering sounds. "You didn't do that?" Chucky asked, but it was more of a statement than a question. We both knew I hadn't, just as I knew he hadn't either. As we started picking up the dishes, we noticed something even stranger. They were lined up perfectly in a straight line across the kitchen floor. "This isn't right. We need to tell Mom about this," I said, but Chucky shook his head. "No, but maybe we should ask her about who lived here before us. Come on, Liz, we can handle this ourselves. We're not babies. Just grow up," he insisted before heading back to his room. I put the dishes back in the sink and returned to the living room. I turned off the TV before, so when I sat back on the couch and glanced at the blank screen, I saw something that froze me in place. Reflected in the screen was the figure of someone standing behind the couch. I whipped around, but no one was there. Suddenly, the air around me turned icy cold, so cold that I couldn't bear to stay seated. "What do you want?" I asked out loud, more out of instinct than anything. I'd always been fascinated by ghosts and paranormal stories, but when it's happening in your own house, it's completely different. There was no response, so I sat back down. The spot that had been freezing just moments before had returned to normal. "I want you out of our house," I said firmly, trying to sound as serious as possible. The entity didn't seem to like that. I heard Chucky's bedroom door slam shut, and then I heard him yelling. I rushed through the house and held the door open for him. But as I grabbed the doorknob, I felt a strong shock, much more powerful than ordinary static electricity. The door slammed again, and then suddenly, everything went completely silent. A wave of peace washed over us, almost as if it came out of nowhere. Chucky and I exchanged bewildered looks, both feeling the calm. It was over for now. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed everything that had happened, including what I'd seen reflected in the TV. The strange sense of calm stayed with me, helping me feel at ease for the rest of the night. The next morning, I got up and found Chucky already awake and ready for school. If you've ever had a 16-year-old brother, you know that's a rare sight. "Are you sick or something?" I joked, only half serious. "It's Uncle Mike," he replied. I turned to face him, confused. Uncle Mike had died in the Vietnam War before either of us was born, but our family kept his memory alive. He was always mentioned at family gatherings, and Grandma never ran out of stories about him. "What are you talking about?" I asked. It didn't make sense. What I'd felt the night before was cold and threatening. Couldn't be him. "Why do you think all the creepy stuff happens so far apart?" Chucky said. "And after every time, we always end up feeling safe. I think Uncle Mike comes here to, protect us or fight it off from us or something." "What makes you think that?" I was still skeptical. The idea that a family spirit was protecting us seemed too far-fetched. "Last night, I had a dream about Uncle Mike," he said. "Liz, I haven't thought about him in months. Don't you think it's weird that I dream about him right after all that happened?" It was strange, but I didn't say anything. I just shrugged, not sure what to make of it. After that, months went by without another incident. But somehow I knew it wasn't over yet. It had been 7 months since the incident with the dishes and the door slamming, and my brother and I had started to believe that whatever had been haunting us was gone for good. Mom was working again one night, and Chucky and I were in our rooms doing homework, listening to music, whatever we usually did to pass the time. I hadn't fully believed Chucky when he told me he thought our Uncle Mike was somehow protecting us, like a guardian angel. But for some reason, I started keeping a small wallet-sized picture of him on my bedside table. When Mom noticed, she asked why, and I told her it made me feel safe at night. She teared up, giving me a big smile. "What is it?" I asked. She then told me about a dream she'd had shortly after I was born. In the dream, Uncle Mike came to her and said, "I'll always protect them, I promise, sis." Hearing this convinced me that Uncle Mike was watching over us, even when Mom wasn't there. Later that night, I shared Mom's story with Chucky, and he smiled, relieved that we were being watched over. That evening, our dog, Max, started barking uncontrollably. Living on a farm, we were used to him barking at deer or rabbits passing through, but there was something distressed in his bark that night. Chucky went to the window to see what was going on, but the fog outside was so thick he could barely see past the porch. "That's weird," he muttered. I stepped out of my room and stood a few feet behind him. "What's weird?" I asked, feeling that familiar, uneasy ache in my stomach. "Look at how foggy it is. It's dry as a desert outside, but there's fog everywhere," he said. I peered out the window. The fog was so thick, and Max was at the end of his rope, flipping out. "What's wrong with your dog?" he asked, and I shook my head. "Maybe he sees another animal?" I suggested, but I didn't feel certain. We watched him for a few minutes until, finally, he stopped barking. We both turned to head back to our rooms when a rush of cold air swept through the hallway, like an icy wind blowing through an open window. Then suddenly the power went out. Darkness filled the house. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. "Chuck!" I screamed. I felt his hand on my shoulder, and he guided me to the living room, where we kept candles. I could tell he felt as unsettled as I did as he rummaged through the end table drawers, trying to find a lighter or matches. I had a bad feeling something was about to happen. The floors in the house began to creak, like footsteps moving toward us from the other side of the house. The noise grew louder, closer with each step. "Hurry up," I urged, which only seemed to make him more nervous. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and then we heard laughing. A low, sinister sound that didn't seem human. I could feel its presence close to us, but it was as if something was keeping it from coming any closer. Finally, I heard the click of the lighter, and Chucky quickly lit a candle, shining it around the room. There was nothing there. The silence that followed was so intense it made my skin crawl. They say when it's that quiet, something bad is about to happen. Suddenly, we heard a high-pitched scream, so loud it hurt my ears. The candle blew out, and something grabbed my arm. "Chuck!" I shrieked. Whatever had hold of me was pulling and twisting my arm. I kept calling out for Chucky, and I could feel his arm around my waist, trying to pull me back. But it wasn't working. The pain in my arm grew worse with every second, and I knew if this thing held me any longer, my arm would snap. "Uncle Mike, please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I didn't scream it. I barely spoke the words. But someone must have heard me because, at that moment, the grip on my arm loosened, and suddenly, every light in the house flicked on. Chucky collapsed onto the couch, and I just stood there, frozen. We both felt it was over because that same strange calm settled over the room. Chucky picked up the blown-out candle and put the lighter back in the drawer. "That was smart, coming to the living room with all these candles. And thanks for leading me here, sis." "I couldn't see a thing," he said. I looked at him, confused. "What?" he asked. "I didn't lead you in here. I felt your hand on my shoulder guiding me," I said, my voice shaking as I collapsed onto the couch beside him. "Thanks, Uncle Mike," Chucky said out loud. I don't know if it was a coincidence, but the lamp flickered a few times right then. That was the last major thing that ever happened to us in that house. Occasionally, we'd feel cold spots, experience random electrical problems, or sense unease, but we always knew Uncle Mike was looking out for us. A few years later, Chucky graduated high school and went off to college in Tennessee. Mom left her job as a nurse and started working full-time as a professor for paramedics, so we moved closer to the university where she taught. Thank you for reading my story. This part is always hard for me to share because it was so traumatizing. Having something truly evil take hold of me was terrifying, and I don't know what would have happened without a guardian angel's help. I wish I could say I made this up, but unfortunately, these events really happened. If you ever feel like there's an evil entity in your house, take it seriously. These things can be very hostile. I know dreams aren't usually discussed on this forum, but I believe it's essential to share mine to understand my experience fully. I was 16 and had just started dating my high school sweetheart, Zach. We shared a deep connection, unlike anything I'd felt before, almost spiritual. The night before I was supposed to go to Zach's house for dinner and meet his parents, I had an intense dream about my own death. Rather than focus on the death part, I'll describe what happened after. I found myself in a strange place where everything was a calming light blue. I felt a sense of peace as I realized I was standing in front of Zach, watching him asleep in his bed. I felt an overwhelming urge to say goodbye, but before I could, I was suddenly transported to his living room, where I was surrounded by shadowy figures, all in the same shade of light blue. The next day, I told Zach about the dream, describing his house and how he was lying in his bed. Zach was visibly shaken. He told me he'd woken up in exactly that position, and my description of his house was spot on, even though I'd never been there. With that background, I hope you'll better understand what happened next. One afternoon, Zach, our friend Dawn, and I were hanging out in his living room, goofing off and chatting about the paranormal. In the middle of our conversation, I heard my name whispered. I looked at my friends, thinking they were messing with me, but they insisted they hadn't said anything. Shrugging it off, we continued talking. Not long after, I heard it again, along with a strong, strange pull to the attic. Zach's bedroom was in the attic, which was fully converted into a room in their old house. I tried to ignore the feeling, but it grew stronger until, quietly, I got up and headed upstairs. As I climbed the attic stairs, I heard scratching sounds from the crawl space, like animals rustling inside the walls. When I reached the top of the stairs, I turned the corner into Zach's room and froze. To this day, I don't fully understand what happened. I just couldn't move. The room was dimly lit by the fading light outside, enough that I could make out objects. As I looked toward the bed, the air became thick and humid, and the shadows in the room seemed to grow, spreading until they were moving toward me. I was paralyzed, unable to move or scream. Suddenly, I felt an intense heat as something rushed past me, forcefully pushing me backward. Regaining my balance, I found myself shouting, "Why don't you leave me alone? I don't want you here anymore." I stumbled down the stairs, stopping just before the door. Once again, I heard my name whispered, and looking up, I saw an inky blackness creeping along the ceiling and down the wall, moving toward me. I felt frozen, barely able to breathe. The next thing I knew, Zach and Dawn were pulling me off the stairs and into their arms. I was so scared I could only cry. They held me for a while until we finally decided to leave. A couple of days later, while sitting at school, I asked them what they'd seen after I came down the stairs. Dawn explained that they'd heard me scream and ran to help, but there was some kind of barrier preventing them from getting up the stairs. They had to watch helplessly as I stumbled down. Zach told me that once I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, I seemed to zone out, staring at the ceiling without blinking. He also told me my eyes had a green glow, even though my eyes are brown. I'm not entirely sure what happened that day, or if it connects to the dream I'd had about Zach's house. I was hoping someone might be able to offer insight. My name is Kaylin, and I guess I'll just jump into my story. I moved in with my mother when I was 14, and since then, I've been experiencing paranormal activities. For a long time, it seemed I was the only one who noticed. The first night I experienced anything unusual was intense. I was lying in bed, wide awake and texting on my phone, when I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I assumed it was my stepdad, who had a rule against my little sister and me using our phones past 10. So, I quickly turned my phone off and pretended to be asleep. That's when I heard a distinct woman's voice say, "Why is she so excited?" Followed by a man's voice replying, "I don't know." Then, suddenly, I felt something sit on my chest. I was completely paralyzed, unable to move. I felt cold and almost numb, but somehow I wasn't cold. Eventually, I managed to move my arms, then my whole body, and as soon as I did, I heard a wailing, crying sound. Panicking, I ran upstairs to my sister's room, thinking maybe her TV was on and that's what I'd heard. But when I got there, she was fast asleep, and her TV was off. I never had another experience quite like that, but strange things continued to happen over the years. I'd dream about the woman, hear whispering when I was alone. Doors would shut on their own. TVs would turn on and off. The radio would come on by itself. I'd feel something sit on the edge of my bed, and I'd feel watched. For the next 3 years, these things only happened to me. I told my mom, but she thought I was dreaming or imagining it. About a month ago, we had a friend over, Rita, who brought along a ghost box and an EMF detector. The ghost box is a radio with burned transmission wires, so it scans frequencies without picking up stations, producing only white noise, while the EMF detector picks up changes in the electromagnetic field. We started in my mom's room. Rita asked questions into the ghost box but didn't get a response. I was tired and lying on the bed with my eyes closed when the EMF detector started beeping, and the ghost box suddenly said, "Wake up!" The voices from the ghost box sounded robotic. We continued asking questions but didn't get more responses, so we decided to try the basement. Downstairs, Rita asked several questions, and we got responses to each one. We learned that the man's name was David, and there was also a woman present, though she didn't say much. I suggested we move to my room, and the ghost box responded, "Yeah, go in there." As we headed to my room, I told Rita about the experiences I'd been having. Once there, Rita asked why they were bothering me. David responded, "She's pretty." Rita then asked if he was a pedophile, but instead of answering, he asked, "Where's Courtney, my little sister?" Rita told him she was at school, and after that, David stopped talking. Over the next few nights, both my stepsister and stepfather began experiencing things in my room, like feeling touched, having their pant legs tugged, or feeling something sit on the bed while they slept. Neither of them knew anything about our previous communication with David. Weeks later, my stepfather went to see a psychic. Her first question was, "Who's David?" Since he didn't know about the ghost box sessions, he told her he didn't know, and she let it go. Now, I'm left wondering if David is something negative or harmful, and what his intentions might be. I've experienced strange things throughout my life, so I'm curious if he might have some connection to me. Any insights would be helpful. I've debated sharing my experiences for a long time because making them public scares me. People often say I'm crazy, and maybe that's why I've hesitated to talk about it. Sometimes I wonder if thinking about it so much has driven me crazy. But these things really happened. I've seen things, felt things, even predicted things. I'm not sure if they're predictions, but I've had strong feelings about events that ended up happening. Mostly about death, accidents, or lost things returning. Call me crazy if you want, but it's true. It all started when I was younger, around middle school. One morning, my grandma woke me up to tell me my uncle had a heart attack. But before she even spoke, I described what had happened to him. I told her I'd dreamed it. She didn't believe me, thinking I'd somehow overheard her phone call, but I was asleep in the back of the house, far from where she'd taken the call in the living room. After that, there was an incident with my missing cat. She'd been gone for a week, and one day, I just knew she'd come back. I told my family I felt she would walk out of the garage, and then walk toward it myself, and sure enough, my cat ran out. Then, one day, my boyfriend and I were driving home from the lake, and he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I told him to buckle up because I had a feeling we'd get into a wreck. No sooner had he fastened his seatbelt than a car came toward us head-on. He swerved, and while we avoided a full collision, we were close. That seatbelt may have saved him. I don't know if these predictions are connected to my experiences with the paranormal, but I feel they must be. My encounters with what I believe is the afterlife started years ago. The first time was when I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. I have trouble sleeping, so I was just lying there with my eyes closed when I noticed the flashing night light near my door. I suddenly felt someone was in the house. Then, I noticed the light seemed to dim, as if something was blocking it. In a split second, I could see it fully. I lay still, the feeling of being watched intensifying. Now from inside my room, a dark figure loomed over me, pressing down on my chest, smothering and choking me. I tried to scream and move but was completely paralyzed, unable to speak, breathe, or fight back. All I could do was cry. Thankfully, my brother was awake that night due to chest pains, and when he turned on his light to tell my grandma, the light reached into my room. Suddenly, whatever was holding me down released me, and I could move again. I searched my room, but nothing was there. Another time, I was alone at home with my cousin. We were sitting in the living room, and on the other side of the wall was my bedroom. As we watched TV, something hit the wall hard enough to shake the mirror above us. We ran into my room, but there was nothing there. Once, I was outside feeding my cats when one of them suddenly began hissing, her fur standing up. I looked up and saw a human figure standing at the end of the backyard, watching me. Terrified, I ran inside, screaming and crying. My grandma went to check, but no one was there. The most recent incident happened just the other day. I was in my room, about to get into the tanning bed, and went to the window to check my phone for a text. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a white blur darting toward my closet. At first, I thought maybe it was my baby sister hiding, but when I checked, I found nothing. I'm not sure what's going on or if it's anything at all, but I truly believe something is there, and it scares me.